Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage the President and CEO of the Fargo-Moorhead West Fargo Chamber of Commerce, Shannon Full.
Good morning, everyone. Is there coffee out there today? It's great to see you all. Welcome today to our fourth Midwest Energy Summit. We're really thrilled to have you all here today and to have so many of you listening and joining in online as well. So we started this event 4 years ago with a conversation by a couple of our energy companies on the importance of being able to talk with diverse minds and diverse thought about a really critical and important topic of energy. And so we took an idea and brought that to life with now 31 partnering chambers from across the 5 Midwest states. Last year we had about 7,200 people online viewing this, and then obviously a room filled with business leaders as well. So we appreciate your time, your commitment, your thought leadership to all of our speakers that are here joining us. Thank you for traveling across the country to come and join us. We believe it's a really critical topic that is often very difficult and a large topic to understand. And so today you'll see and hear a lot of differing perspectives on energy and where things are going. But the timing couldn't be better, right? We're 2 days post-election, and if you were anything like me, and especially our policy director, Cale, that was a sleepless night of watching the results come in. And we know that energy will be a top priority for the new administration as we look to that. So we're really excited about today. We're thrilled that we've had since the very beginning of this our 2 premier sponsors being Cass County Electric and Xcel Energy, both of which have a tremendous footprint, not just in the energy space, but their commitment to this region, the commitment to the states, to the Midwest and the country is very evident. So we want to thank both of them for joining us today. We have numerous other sponsors that are joining us. Thank you to our gold sponsors, a new sponsor in NextEra Energy Resources. Thank you, Mike, and for bringing us the team from NextEra. We're excited for the new partnership and relationship we'll have. And Otter Tail Corporation, the Otter Tail crew has been a long time member and supporter of the Chamber as well, and we get a lot of the perspective from the Otter Tail crew on the Minnesota side as well. So thank you so much, Mark, and the whole crew from Otter Tail. We appreciate you. We'd also like to extend a heartfelt thanks to our media sponsors, both Inforum and MWC Advertising. Your support plays a critical role in the success of this. So Inforum broadcasts live the summit on 20 of their different news sites across Minnesota, North Dakota, and South Dakota, providing real-time coverage of today's event. Thank you, Inforum MWC, for your partnership and spreading the message of today's event and helping us connect to the broader energy community. Also, a great thanks to the silver sponsors, AM 1100 The Flag, iDigital, Minnesota State University Moorhead, North Dakota State University, One Oak, Prairie Business Magazine, Future Farmer Magazine, and Starion Bank. Our corporate sponsors, who you see on the screen behind me, are also those of you that are in attendance today. All of these sponsorships make it really critical because this is how we're able to deliver this content not just to you here in the room, but have the ability to stretch that across the 5-state area. We also are really excited for the fact that we have 31 chambers of commerce that have partnered with us and are joining with us to bring this to their members within communities, small and large, from states in North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota, Missouri, Iowa. We're really excited. And Wisconsin. Don't forget Wisconsin. Wisconsin's my home state, and I just forgot them. So sorry, Wisconsin team. The co-hosts are on the screen now, so we thank you for those organizations. that are helping us. Dennis Kroll, you see him walking around with the camera. You can't miss him. 5'20" Design Studios is a continued partner of ours to help us with all of our photography needs. And then Livewire, for those of you that are local companies or even companies that are looking for that phenomenal event experience, the Livewire team is second to none. Finally, a thanks to the Hilton Garden Inn. They have a tremendous team that welcomes us in and will show us a really great time today. So let's give a round of applause to all of our sponsors and partners. Now we'll get things kicked off, and so it's a great pleasure for me to call upon Paul Mathis, the president and CEO of Cass County Electric Cooperative. Paul is a staunch advocate of the energy space, has a breadth of knowledge in this area, is one of my board members, executive committee members, and a really great champion for this region. So thanks you, Paul, for being here.
I gotta find the right page here. Let's see what I brought my own. We're good to go. Well, I'll start off by saying, I made some remarks last night at the social, and I'll just reiterate that today. And a huge thank you to Shannon and her team at the Chamber. This all started about 5 years ago. This conversation, actually, Shannon and I were some cocktails. And the Chamber is always wondering how they can help promote business, how they can attract business and retain business and help their existing businesses grow and learn and get their ideas and issues and challenges out there. So this was one way that Shannon brought to us on how we can educate our members, the communities, the businesses that we serve, not only in across North Dakota, but what they've done with streaming this across our entire region. So a huge thank you to Shannon and her team for helping us get the challenges that we face, the opportunities that we face, and the issues that we face in the energy industry. So a huge thank you to her and her team. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Midwest Energy Summit. My name is Paul Mathis. I'm the president and CEO of Cass County Electric Cooperative. I have to say that it's a privilege to co-sponsor today's event for the fourth consecutive year. At Cass County Electric, we know that energy is more than just a service. It's the backbone of our daily lives and the engine that drives our economy. As a member-owned cooperative, we have a unique relationship with those that we serve and are proud to prioritize the needs of our members over profits. In fact, this year alone, our board of directors, whom are sitting at this front table, approved to return over $3.5 million in capital credits to our members, rewarding their trust in us over the years. As we know, the energy sector is undergoing major transformations, making today's summit so timely. From the rise of renewable energy resources and advances in carbon capture technology to shifts in energy policy and the role of traditional energy sources, these topics are critical to ensure the reliability, affordability, and sustainable energy future. At Cass County Electric, we've navigated these changing dynamics without raising rates for 7 consecutive years, which is a testament to the strength of our partnership, like the one we have with our wholesale power provider, Minn Kota Power Cooperative. Today's discussion will delve into the importance of grid resilience, the synergy between energy and agriculture, and the technology shaping our region's next energy chapter. I'm excited about the insights that we'll learn and gain from the impressive lineup of experts today. I look forward to engaging in conversations that will help guide the future of energy in the Midwest. Thank you for joining us, and welcome to the Midwest Energy Summit.
Good morning. Good morning. My name is Paul Jordan. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Corvell Group. We're located in St. Paul, Minnesota. We're a 100-plus-year-old engineering and construction company, specializing a lot in the energy space, in the energy infrastructure space. I'm thrilled to be here. Appreciate the chamber asking me to moderate this panel. And with that, we're going to start with Bria, and she's going to introduce herself, and then we'll get into questions and answers.
Thanks. Good morning. I'm Bria Shea. I'm the Regional Vice President of Regulatory for the Upper Midwest for Xcel Energy. Xcel Energy we've got service territory in 8 states. We've got about 4 million electric customers and about 2 million natural gas customers. Particularly happy to be here today to talk about renewables and the future there. Xcel was the first utility in the United States to announce our goal to be carbon-free by 2050. We were well positioned to make that due to our early action on a couple of fronts. We were an early adopter of wind, and to this day, we've been one of the #1 providers of wind in the United States for almost 20 years. We also are currently building one of the nation's largest solar projects. When it's all said and done, it'll be almost 1,000 megawatts, and it is directly replacing a retiring coal plant. We also have one of the top programs in the United States for distributed solar with a Community Solar Gardens program, and are also leading the way on long-duration storage with a pilot project that we're building that is 10 megawatts, 100 hours of firm dispatchable. That is a new technology that basically is storing energy by rusting and derusting iron. So a couple of things that we're doing. We also have a strong nuclear portfolio. We've got 3 units that make a huge contribution to our ability to start to make some way on that carbon-free goal. And then also, like I said, a pretty strong wind portfolio with over 4,000 megawatts of installed capacity right now, and making our way on solar as well. So together with those efforts, we are currently 67% carbon-free, and our system has over 40% renewables. So.
Good morning, everyone. John Hollingsworth, Director of Renewable Projects at Elite Clean Energy. Been in the renewable field for the last 15 years, and at Elite Clean Energy, we have wind projects going from coast to coast, operate in over 9 states. Right now, I think we've built and developed about 2 gigawatts, and we've sold off some of those assets along the way. I'm proud to say that I've sponsored and supported a lot of projects here in North Dakota, the Bison Wind Farm and Thunder Spirit Wind down in Hettinger, North Dakota as well. At Elite Clean Energy, our parent company is Elite, and sister company is Minnesota Power. So we operate primarily as Elite in northeast Minnesota, but at Elite Clean Energy from coast to coast, Oregon to Pennsylvania.
Good morning, everyone. First and foremost, thank you to the Chamber. This is a great event, and very happy to be here and honored to have been invited to be on the stage with everyone here. My name is Danny Martell. I'm Vice President Central Region, which is the Upper Midwest, as we define it, from Florida. And I also run strategic campaigns for NextEra Energy Resources. NextEra Energy Resources is a subsidiary of NextEra Energy based out of Juno Beach, Florida. NextEra Energy Resources was actually born out of our vertically integrated utility, Florida Power and Light, which is, we consist of nearly 6 million customers throughout the peninsula and the panhandle of Florida, with a very integrated source of generation from solar, lots of solar, gas, which we are one of the largest purchasers of natural gas in the country because of the portfolio in Florida, and then also with 4 nuclear reactors in Florida. Outside of Florida, which is the entity I work for, NextEra Energy Resources, the sister company to FPL, we operate in 48 states, and in this state in particular, we have 15 projects, almost 4 gigawatts of power, 2 pipelines that are also in production, and then we have been here for 20 plus years operating. It's a great state for us, and really happy to continue the operations in the state of North Dakota.
Thanks, Danny. We were talking this morning and last night a little bit about some of the questions that we're going to talk about today. So we're going to start with kind of markets, a little bit of market, because when we think of markets, we're also affected by the workforce in terms of labor shortages that we have right now in the country. But to kind of focus on market, in the United States, obviously, we're talking about a huge demand in electrical needs from a number of reasons, whether it's data centers, whether it's semiconductors, growth in population, and all those type of things. And with that being said, what are the opportunities for renewable energy to kind of feed into those spaces?
Sure, I can start. Well, I think there's a huge opportunity here for renewables, and I'll focus maybe on data centers. So certainly we are seeing increased load growth. In fact, load growth that we've never seen before. It's been about 10 to 15 years of low to no load growth. And so now with electrification, increased EV adoption rates, and data centers, we're having conversations now in the gigawatts, not megawatts. We're talking about doubling, tripling the opportunity anyways, to double or triple the current system. So I think one nice thing about data centers is that by and large, a lot of their goals are in line with the sustainability efforts that a lot of us are working towards. So they do want to be as clean as possible, and renewables fit really nicely in there. The challenge, of course, is that renewables are intermittent, and data center loads, as I'm sure you know, are generally 24/7, not a lot of flexibility there. And so there does need to be some other resources to be supporting those renewables so that we can serve these loads 24/7. And I think, again, there's really nice partnerships there as we think about the need for new technology. Another advantage of data centers is that they've got the capital to invest, and so along with utilities and the industry, now we've got these other partners to start to spend significant amounts looking at new nuclear, long duration storage, hydrogen, those supplemental resources that we need. And so I think in addition to the renewable opportunity, the data centers bring the capital that will help us advance the other resources to support the needs that we see overall, including from data centers.
I couldn't agree more. You're dead on. And just to put more context to what Bria just said about the exponential growth in terms of gigawatts, there was recently a report issued by McKinsey Consulting that says that in the next 7 years, we're going to be adding approximately 470 gigawatts. That's an amazing number over the next 7 years, as opposed to over the last 7 years, we added about 140 gigawatts nationally. So the growth is absolutely there. So, the most deployable, fastest source of power for new build is going to remain to be renewables. You can plug and play and move quickly, and absolutely, it's not a purely dispatchable source of power, but nevertheless, it's quick and it's affordable. So it absolutely has to play a role in terms of how we continue to meet that it's mind-blowing demand.
I couldn't agree more. And another thing that we're seeing with data centers is at first they wanted to be around center of capitals. They wanted to be around the Midwest. They wanted to be around cities. And now as we look at data centers, they want the cheapest form of power. And typically that cheapest form of power is now in a rural area next to an existing facility that already has transmission or requires a minimal amount of transmission to get that power there. So it's what was a thought of a data center just 5 years ago, all of a sudden that whole demand has shifted of where they want to be located as well. Now it's all about how much it costs to get energy for a consistent flow.
So with that being said, when we talk about the growth, what are your biggest concerns with your companies in terms of what you're seeing with, obviously we import a lot of the products, solar panels, raw materials, the workforce obviously is domestic. What are you seeing in those areas? What are the concerns of your organizations, and what are you guys looking at to do to help solve some of those issues?
From our perspective, it's about relationship. It's having relationship with those vendors. Supply chain issues were real, and they still are, particularly with this incredible growth. So maintaining strong relationships with suppliers is the utmost importance. Also diversification of, look, we want to source from the United States always, but we have great suppliers in Europe, and we have great suppliers out of Southeast Asia and Japan. So that level of diversification is absolutely necessary, but as this market grows, those constraints are it's going to cause more pressure onto how quickly we can deploy.
Yeah, historically, if I were to look at wind, particularly, our biggest years that we've had were 19, 20, 21, and we were installing roughly 12 to 14 gigawatts of wind during that period. And now they're projecting, I think 26 is 14, 27 is going to be larger than that, and 28 continuing to grow. So that's the current trajectory. The U.S. assembly plants aren't able to supply all that, so you do have to look at overseas, unfortunately, for some of this. I think the first people in are going to chase that domestic content, and under IRA currently, that would be a 10% adder for being able to meet the 10% domestic content. So it's going to be growing at a rapid rate here, and how do you source products is going to continue to be, I think, front of mind for all of us.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said here. I would say, we're looking at some of the new technologies that do have the opportunity to be sourced domestically. For instance, that long duration storage pilot project that I mentioned is sourced with iron, which is abundant and rich here in the United States. So hopefully we can continue to see progress there. I also think with some of the recent, tariff complaints and at the federal level that have caused some issues with imported panels, we've seen an abundance of growth, particularly with United States produced solar panels. So we've got a ways to go for sure, but the market is developing, and with recent federal incentives and particularly the domestic incentives, I think there's a lot of room here to grow, and I think we'll continue to focus on those. But right now, we're needing to look elsewhere in addition to at home.
Thanks, Bria. And I'll maybe speak a little bit to labor. So at CorVel, we are primarily, the labor we self-perform is primarily union in the upper Midwest and then non-union in the South. It is recognized by the ABC, the AGC, that we do have significant labor. I'm not going to say shortages because we do see a lot of people coming into the trades. I tell people that my son graduated from high school 2 years ago. He went to high school primarily, everybody goes to college. In his graduating class, or in his group of friends, half of the kids are going to college, the other half are going into some sort of trade. So we are seeing some improvement there, but it doesn't happen overnight. So I see a question here. Is the labor force strong enough to handle the load growth over the next 7 years? I would say it's going to be an extreme challenge. And I don't know if you guys wanted to comment on labor in terms of that when you talk about 7 years, but that is, we talk about the gigawatt expansion. It needs people it needs equipment, people, obviously, and materials and equipment.
Yeah, I mean, labor is certainly one of the topics of the day for Xcel and with our partners. When I think about just even within Xcel Energy and the projects we've got being in service over the next 5 years, it's overwhelming. It's transmission lines, it's distribution infrastructure upgrades, it's significant capital projects that run the gamut across our system. And so when you actually think about stacking up who is going to build this, not even to mention that every other utility is doing the same thing as us, we are definitely being more proactive than we ever have. Labor is part of our project plans like it never has. We are signing labor agreements earlier than we ever have, actually mapping what type of workers do we need, what are the skills, and if we don't have them today, then how can we build that out? So in addition to planning and having early conversations, we're also have got a pretty robust training program, apprenticeships, where we're bringing people in, they can do on-the-job training. We're reaching out to historically underrepresented communities to make sure that everybody has an opportunity here in the energy transition, and that we can train you. We will bring you along with us because I think as it sits today, the workforce has a ways to go. The other opportunity, of course, is that as we're retiring coal and moving to these new types of fuel sources, is that those coal workers, at Xcel, we've got a commitment to not lay off any workers. If you work at Xcel and the plant is retiring that you work at, we will retrain you. If you want to work on transmission, distribution, gas, nuclear, if you want to do it, we will train you to do that. So I think we're coming at it from all angles, and I think that's what everybody needs to do to make sure that that's not what stops us in the energy transition.
Yeah, labor is, currently it's difficult to find employees to work, and especially rural communities that have the skills that are able to facilitate the necessary demand to operate our plants. So if you look in the future, this is only going to grow. It's more and more difficult to find skilled labor. And one thing that we've actually seen, a model that we're using right now, is looking for people in the community and training them up. Because if you're talking about being in rural Oregon, it's really hard to take people from Southern California and actually telling them that they want to stay there for more than 2 years. You can pay them for 2 years to stay there, but that long-term getting into the community, growing a family there, typically you have to find the individuals that are already there. And that's been actually a very successful story that we've been able to run through here.
Yeah, I think John Bria had all the remarks. Yeah, absolutely, labor is going to continuously be a problem, and it was before. So yeah, you're dead on.
So we've got some questions here that have come from the audience around President Trump. Obviously, President-elect Trump has talked about suggested repealing the Inflation Reduction Act, while Speaker Johnson has urged a more measured response due to concerns from his caucus. Is probably not a fair question since it's so early, but any talk in the last couple of days of any new expectations coming out of this administration?
Well, since we're 2 days in and, well, or 2 months away from this actually taking effect, I really don't know what the future is going to hold. But if I were to predict anything, I'd look at the past. So we were here in 2016. Renewables had the same concern. And one thing that we learned as Trump at that point took office is, most of these projects are going to the red states. So all of a sudden, you're looking at a vast amount of construction, money, employment going into states that want this work to take place. Renewables has a ton of insane amount of capital. So we're not talking about your grocery store, little utilities, anything like that, but you have the big financial players, the JP Morgans, the big corporations, the Walmarts, every major corporation, financial player in the US is invested in this. So I think all of a sudden it's really difficult to take away their projected returns in the future here, but it's all speculation. This is just what I'm hoping more than what I know, but we'll find out, I guess.
Yeah, and I totally agree again. IRA is predominantly based on incentives. And those incentives, as you said, are predominantly in red states. I mean, and a lot of it's even state-specific. So there's a carbon sequestration tax credit. There's a nuclear tax credit. There's a hydrogen tax credit, all being formed and based from the IRA. So I totally agree with you, and those are the conversations that we're having, and you hear around the country as well, particularly in red states. How do you take away this source of capital? And also, I mean, let's face it too, things that have come out of it help to create predictability in markets. They help with innovation. So taking it away would be difficult. I agree with that.
Thank you. So another question from the audience that I'm going to combine with kind of some infrastructure and delivery questions is going back to data centers, and because renewable energy is intermittent, and we talk about needing base load, when we talk about renewables and how do you offset, whether it's data centers or other areas that need base load, how do you offset that when you have a renewable portfolio?
Sure. So I think there's a variety of answers. I do think right now the de facto position has been for natural gas, and certainly that is a resource that we continue to use in Xcel. That said, I think, when I think about SMRs or new nuclear, long duration storage, or even the currently available 4-hour lithium ion storage, in the right circumstances, and hydrogen, I think those are all the new technologies that we need to advance to get to this ultimate carbon-free, or at least more reduced carbon than we have today. Data centers certainly challenge that, but again, I think they've got the capital to put behind the new tech that I think we need. In the meantime, gas is part of that for sure, but I don't think it's forever, and I do think that taken together with a broad, diverse mix, you get there pretty quickly.
Yeah, I fully agree. And then another thing, especially in the state here, we'll see more and more carbon capture come into play. And as that carbon capture comes into play, it does reduce the output of those facilities, leaving some top end where that renewable could be sitting with it ancillary. So that allows for the transmission, other things, infrastructure that's in place to be used at that facility.
The other thing I was just going to note is that generally when we're talking about these data centers and the renewables and not being able to serve them, it is very few hours of the year, so it is a very small solution. So even to the extent that we are adding gas or using existing gas, it's very few hours of the year. So the carbon emissions that are actually impacting, they're not actually impacting much because it is so few hours of the year that we're needing to call on them. So I think that's another fact that needs to be stated, that overall, I think it's a minimal contribution to our efforts.
A question from the chamber. So we talked about policy and permitting and the fact that all three organizations work multi-states, which every the states have different regulations. What kind of permitting challenges are you seeing today? What are you kind of predicting for the future? How can people like the North Dakota Chamber and as well as other chambers, what can they do to help with some of those regulatory concerns?
So as we all know, capital loves predictability. And when we enter into a state, we like to know that there is a regulatory environment that is predictable, stable, sustainable, and we're going to do more and more and more, as we have in the state of North Dakota, where things are it's predictable. We know when we go from one local government to the next, it's going to be relatively similar. Whereas there are other states where perhaps, and I think this is one of our biggest challenges, where one county will tell you one thing and another one will do something entirely different. You may have a wind project that spans a couple of counties, so it makes it that's a significant challenge. So, in order to assist with that, having at a state level a very predictable regulatory environment, which then funnels down and demonstrates closely to the local governments that, hey, capital is here, it wants to stay, it wants to build more. So having predictability is the most important thing.
Yeah, I think events just like this are very helpful. I think, as Shannon mentioned in her opening comments, this is a very complex industry that not a lot of people understand well, and as energy becomes more and more forefront of the conversation as we're moving into the energy transition, we've got this increased load. I feel like it is something that I wasn't necessarily talking with my neighbors about, 5 years ago, and now it's something that I'm asked more and more about. So I feel like the education component, like we're doing today, these conversations are really important. We get more advocates, more people who are understanding not only the challenges, but the opportunities, the economic opportunities, the jobs that are here, how people can participate. So I think having more conversations is a really critical way in general that Chamber of Commerce can help, because the more people understand what we're doing, the more people can start to be talking about this and helping our causes, because I do think the stability factor is huge for us. These are really long timelines, right? We usually come up with an idea 1 year, and it's being built anywhere from 5 to 10 years later, depending upon the project. So anybody that we can help and advocate for those projects, for our efforts, helps expedite the process with our regulators and those conversations. I think that's all really helpful. So just these conversations, I think, are great.
And I would add too, and I think everybody in this room would probably agree. I think the education component that Bria talked about, it's really important at really kind of the grade school and high school level. It is alarming how many kids are coming out of high school and have no idea of the physics involved or anything involved with how energy, whether it's renewable or what some people might call renewable versus base load, in terms of how electricity and just energy in general happens. And I think in the country, quite honestly, we've done a huge disservice with the people coming up in terms of education. I think that is the number one issue. When people can be honest and even if you disagree with coal or nuclear, at least you can have a conversation about what that looks like. I think education is absolutely imperative. There was, Bria kind of touched on this, but with the increase in renewables and looking at natural gas being there to kind of help with the base load, any concerns with price stabilization, and obviously it's a commodity, so it's going to move up and down, but any concerns around natural gas pricing as it pertains to supporting, or any other base load that has to, pricing that has to support renewables?
Well, see, I think there's one huge advantage of renewables is that there is no volatility in pricing, right? We're not buying fuel, so once we've got that capital spent, we've got operation and maintenance expenses, but we're not exposed to the market like we are with other fuels. So I think it all gets back to diversification, right? I think it's nice to have a whole bunch of different resources so you're not exposed to any one type of fuel or risk. And, you know, obviously tax incentives go into this, but that's generally, you know what you're getting into with renewables. And so I think the question is about, do you expect prices to be stable for natural gas? It's volatile, but I also think that's part of the reason that we diversify and we're never exposed to too much, you know, any one sort of fuel spike.
I think a lot of players in the room or around the country that are working with gas, there are ways to hedge. There are long-term contracts and other things that you can put in place to reduce the risk. I don't think it necessarily gets the balloon instance, but it does help stabilize that. It's something a lot more predictable that you can put into a financial model and understand your sensitivities around it.
So a question related to the Department of Energy. It's a little bit of a long one, but the DOE has allocated $925 million to the Heartland Hub. The project obviously is meant to help decarbonize the ag sector's production of fertilizer, decrease the regional cost of clean hydrogen, and advance the use of clean hydrogen in electric generation and for cold climate space heating in Minnesota, obviously in North and South Dakota. Can you talk more about the intersection between ag and the reliance on traditional fuels?
So I think just a couple of thoughts. So agriculture is obviously a very energy intensive production, both from the production and also the actual equipment and manufacturing that goes into it. You know, tractors, large equipment generally relying on diesel fuel. So I think there's a huge opportunity here, right? We're all working toward a cleaner grid, a cleaner economy, and when egg production prices increase, because of energy prices, we all pay for that, right? That's coming through in our food and other agricultural projects or products. So I think there's a huge area for opportunity here to work together. And you know, I think hydrogen has a role there, but you know, beyond that, that's about what I've got to offer.
Yeah, and you're right. Hydrogen plays a pretty big role, with the exception of recently, or actually beginning or end of last year, Department of Treasury came out with new guidance on how to price hydrogen in the market, which complicated things a little bit. So you know, the market has to play its way through that as it relates to hydrogen, but there certainly does play a future. In terms of hydrogen matched with generation, we launched about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, a plant. It began as a pilot in Central Florida, where we're using electrolyzer to extract hydrogen and blend it with natural gas, and the electrolyzer is powered through solar panels, so it's, you know, true green hydrogen being blended, and that's becoming a more and more noticeable throughout not just Florida but in other states where that technology is being utilized. But you know, in terms of hydrogen as a particular fuel source on a retail level, it's a little bit more complicated, and I think, you know, it takes some time to figure that out, even as it relates to the ag markets.
So a nuclear question. So when you look at the growth in energy, and Amazon, I think Google, there's some of the big players that have struck deals with some of the nuclear energy providers. How real over the next, let's say, 5, 10, 15 years in terms of regulatory and technology? I know they're talking about different technology and making some of the nuclear reactors smaller. What are your organization's kind of take on the whole nuclear space in terms of expansion, and where is it easier than other areas in the country?
Yeah, nuclear is I mean, we could do a whole 2 days probably on nuclear, but in short, I think we're seeing a new nuclear revitalization throughout the country, where you have 2 new reactors that went on board in Georgia, and then the restart of a couple of nuclear plants. I think it's Palisades and 3 Mile Island. Yep, thank you. Along with that, you have the advent of small nuclear reactors, SMRs, modular reactors, that, of course, the federal government has been using in vessels for a number of years. Now it becomes, how deployable is that to be commercial? So there's so many factors that will go into how that gets deployed and where. The real question is where. How comfortable are people thinking? The myth is, are you putting an SMR in somebody's backyard in the middle of a neighborhood? No, probably most likely not, of course. But those are discussions that need to be fleshed out around the country.
One other thing about SMR or nanonuclear, it's working around the world, and it's worked throughout DOD and other areas. One challenge that we currently have within the U.S. is, if you look at any nuclear facility, there's tens of thousands of regulations and tens of thousands of man-hours, personnel hours going into regulation, reporting, just to keep a facility online. So all of a sudden, if you're running by those same standards for a nano plant, cost effectively, it doesn't work. So all of a sudden, you'd have to find a way to accept that these are going to be on a different level of regulation, and then I think we're going back to federal policy and other things, which I don't know how long it would take, and I think it has to be a push from the top down to want this, not necessarily from the bottom up.
Yeah, Xcel Energy is definitely looking into a new nuclear. Like I mentioned, we've got 3 nuclear facilities to date, a long history of success, and they've been a key contributor to our baseload needs as well as our carbon-free goals. So we really are interested in the future here. In our last resource plan, which is where we plan the future needs for our customers, we actually modeled new nuclear small modular reactors. Our modeling shows them showing up in the late 2030s, early 2040s. Of course, there's a lot of work to do to get there. Siting is pretty complicated. You need a lot of water, a pretty skilled workforce, the right infrastructure, et cetera. So I think siting is a huge part of the effort. With regards to siting and where it might be more difficult versus other places, like I mentioned, Xcel's got 8 states. Our main headquartered and largest customer population is in Minnesota, and in Minnesota we have a moratorium on new nuclear. So certainly that is a challenge. We would need to either get legislation changed or look in our other 7 states for that. So I think North Dakota in particular is appealing for new nuclear. It's a favorable and welcoming state for that. So I think that's a real opportunity here for us.
Thanks, Bria. Another, I think, real good question is, when we haven't talked about it today here, but battery storage, and as it relates to renewables and the technology, and where's the technology at, and how critical is battery storage for the long-term viability of renewables?
We're big on battery storage, and really the way that I look at it is battery storage is a great piece to the generation puzzle. And in that it's deployable when you need it, and it could help. Excuse me. It could also help to levelize costs at the right time. So in high demand peak periods when you have all your baseload generation trying to go into overdrive, throw on the battery, and there's no input into the battery. The input's already been the capital that you deployed to drop the battery in place. So in that regard, it's great. Also great, coming from Florida, where we have, as you've seen, numerous natural disasters. It's a deployable asset after a disaster where generation may be hurt or cannot come online. It's a great asset to have in place. So we're very bullish on battery. We think it's a great future. Also, not to mention, it is very compatible with both solar and with wind. When the sun isn't shining, the battery is going.
We've got about a minute left, but what is kind of the view of your views of the next 10 to 20 years with renewables?
thinking it's going to be insanely bullish. I think we would build as much as we could. The only thing is just how compatible it is with transmission projects and other things that are going to take place to support that.
Yeah, I agree. I think in addition to the renewables, I don't see that trajectory slowing under any federal administration. I think we need to update our aging infrastructure, build out the transmission grid further, and certainly develop those new technologies that can supplement the intermittency of renewables. So,
renewables aren't going away. Totally agree with both of you. We're developing everywhere we can, but also we have to keep up with that demand. And transmission is going to play a very big piece of that. We haven't delved too much into transmission, but it is certainly something that we need to keep a watchful eye on if we're going to continue with this boom of demand.
Well, first of all, I want to thank the Chamber again for having us up here. I want to thank our panel of Bria, Danny, and John. Thanks a lot for your time this morning. Appreciate it. So, thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Senior Vice President of Strategy and External Engagement at Northern American Electric Reliability Corporation, Camilo Serna.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure being here today. I have a confession to make. This is my first time in North Dakota, Fargo. So thank you for inviting me. It's a great opportunity, and I'm glad to be here. Thank you for the Chamber for inviting us to be here today. So I'm going to be talking about electricity. And electricity is a critical element of the economy. Someone says that electricity is about 5% of the economy, but it is the first 5% of the economy. And really, when you think about the transition that we're here to talk about, electricity today is about 20% of energy delivered to consumers or to businesses. Some of the forecasts, if you see out there, say that by 2050, electricity is going to be 40, 50%. I don't know if those forecasts are going to be right or not, but we're talking about the electricity being a critical element of the economy, not only today, but into the future. But we have three priorities that everyone talks about when you're talking about electricity. You want it to be affordable, cleaner, and reliable. And really, those are three priorities that need to be working in balance. We use a stool as a way to depict this, and all those three legs need to be strong and at the same height. You cannot emphasize one versus the other. If we wanted a 100% affordable system, probably it's not going to be as clean as we want it to be. 100% reliable, it's not going to be very affordable. It's very difficult to get a 100% reliable system. And if you want a 100% clean system, it's not going to be it's not going to be very reliable. And that's going to be the key point. So I'm going to speak about reliability. That's what NERC does, North American Electric Reliability Corporation. So I'm going to be advocating for thinking about reliability as we think about the energy transition. So a little bit more on NERC. So NERC was formally established in 2005 by Congress. And really our goal is to have a highly reliable and secure bulk power system. And I was very pleased to see the photos here. When I say bulk power system, perhaps folks don't understand what I mean, but it is the transmission lines primarily and the generation facilities that power the electricity system is what we're there to manage. And we are a risk management organization. We are there to effectively reduce the risk to the reliability and security of the grid. And we do that working with multiple stakeholders, multiple companies. We're an industry-based organization that gets input from all of you to develop the work that we do. And how we do it? First, we assess risks. We identify what are the risks to the industry, what are the risks to the electricity system through situational awareness, assessments, information that we collect from utility companies related to security risks. Then we identify mitigation actions. And probably what most of you know us for is the standards. NERC develops and enforces mandatory reliability standards for all the transmission companies, generation companies that are connected to the bulk power system. And that we do working with our regional entities. You see in the map the different regional entities that help us audit the implementation of those standards and making sure that the industry is maintaining that that highly secure and reliable grid. So as we think about the risks that we're facing in the electricity system, as we think of the transition, we do face a whole host of new challenges that are very different from those when NERC was established in 2005. We're seeing a basically changing generation mix, significant change in the generation mix across the US. Second, we see, and there was some discussion in the panel before, about significant demand growth over the next 20, 30 years. We also are thinking of very different weather patterns and how they are impacting the system that we need to plan and account for. And finally, we are doing all of these while we face significant challenges from a security threat environment, both cyber and physical. Most of the times, industries have to go through one of these changes one at a time. We're going through 3 major changes and a significant risk environment all at the same time. So let me talk a little bit about each of those with some data. So the first one, regarding the changing generation mix, the first piece that you see there on the chart to the left is the available capacity in the North American system at peak. That happens during the summertime. So the first point is that that available capacity over the last 10 years has been reduced by 4%. So we have less available capacity in the system during the summer peak. That's a significant number when you think about the size of the North American system. The second piece is that most of the reduction in that capacity has come from base load generation, mainly coal and nuclear, that have been retired. So we are basically reducing the margins that we have to operate the system. We're pleased to see that the interconnection queues are very large. It's actually double the amount of installed capacity in the interconnection queue, but it is mainly renewable, solar, wind, as the panel was talking about, which is great. But I'll talk about some of the challenges that that brings to the reliability of the system. So that's the first point. The second point is significant increase in demand. If you look at the chart, we do an assessment of the North American grid every year, and we look at the forecast demand growth. In 2018-19, we saw demand growth for the peak capacity in the 1.5% range. Today, we're at 1.5%, and some forecasts would indicate that in the future, that number could be 4%. We're talking about significant amount of capacity to the system over the next 10 years. And currently, as I indicated, the interconnection queue is primarily renewables, but we need to be thinking about base load generation, dispatchable generation that provides the reliability attributes that the grid needs, and I'll come back to that as it relates to some of our priorities. The other piece, as we are changing this grid and we're relying more and more on renewables, and we think about the weather, we have to plan for the grid very differently than in the past. 2 types of weather patterns that now we need to incorporate in the planning and operation of the grid. First, we now need to worry about events like wind droughts that we didn't have to worry before. An example is in June of last year, there is 600 gigawatts of installed capacity from Canada to Texas. There was a day in June of last year that very few came online. 300 megawatts. That's less than 1%. So the system operated okay. We had low load that day, but if that event happens during a hot summer day, that's where challenges to the risk come into, to the grid come into place. And then on the other hand, we have always had to plan for cold weather, hot summers, but today those events are longer, cover a broader regions of the US and Canada, and have much more significant impacts than they did in the past. So as we plan for the grid, we need to take into account those as well. The example that we have there is Winter Storm Elliott in December of 2022 that impacted significant portions of the eastern part of the US. And one of the key issues is that it impacted the gas system, which I'll speak about in a minute. But then it also created limited availability to export power between regions. So what we do is we put all of these pieces into one map. Every year we conduct assessment and we identify where we see risks in the system. And what you can see there is a blinking yellow and blinking red lights for the system. We have high elevated risk, that's on the yellow. That means that under extreme weather conditions, you could have potential outages. And then the red is during normal weather conditions during the summer. So as you can see the area here, it is in the yellow-red. So we do have worries. We will be updating this in a month, and we'll see where it comes. 5 years ago, most of the US was blue. Today is yellow and red. And one of the key pieces is that we are relying more and more on the gas system, and that was alluded to also on the panel. That's the system that is allowing the electricity system to be more reliable. From 2005, we consume about, or gas generation was about 20% of the generation in the US. Today, it's 40%. And some of the regions, as you see on the chart, are 50, 60, 70% during the winter time. So we are relying on the gas system, but the gas system doesn't have an organization like us that makes sure that it is a highly reliable system for all of us to rely on. So we're working on that. So let me close out with what we think are the key reliability priorities for us as we move forward, and especially as we think of all these risks and what we're trying to manage, and we see these blinking yellow, blinking red lights. So the first piece is that we need to think about the new resources that provide dispatchable generation. And the other piece for us is that they provide what we call essential reliability services. And this is where it can get a little bit technical, but if you think of the grid, it's not just about the capacity that you have on the system. It's not having X megawatts, but it's some of those essential reliability services like frequency and voltage control. That's how the system is able to run and provide the service that we all need. And the system has been built over time to have generating resources that provide inertia so they can provide those services. As we are shutting down some of those equipment that have rotating machines and provide inertia for the system, for the frequency to be there, we're replacing those with inverter-based resources that are basically computers and don't necessarily today provide those services. There is work being done so those resources can provide those reliability services, but we don't see that yet. So that means that we need to rely on some other form of dispatchable generation. Gas is what we have today, but there is discussion about nuclear, hydrogen, carbon capture. I'm looking forward to that discussion later. And we need it in gigawatts at scale. That's the other piece. We need transmission. I won't go into the details. We need to increase the transfer capability between regions. We just released a study result that indicated what type of transfer capability we need between regions in North America. The other piece is that we need to change how we plan the system from capacity to think about energy so we can deal with some of these outage situations that we've seen in the past. And the gas and electric interface. We, as indicated, during the Winter Storm Elliott, we saw the gas infrastructure not being available when we needed it for cold weather reasons. And so we need to work on some standards, have a reliability organization that oversees the gas system, more communication between industries like what we do in the electricity sector when we have a storm event, a winter event. We need that in the gas industry and more accountability. We also need to ensure a robust supply chain for all the resources that we have. And FERC has recently opened order to explore how we develop or think about standards to ensure that the utility companies, the energy companies have enough balancing resources to ensure that we maintain the reliability of the system. We're working on standards that will perhaps ask those utilities to have an energy assurance plan so we know that there is going to be enough electricity, fuel in storage. And that's one of the issues when we see that we're moving away from dispatchable generation to inverter-based resources. And then lastly, as we think about increased electrification, we talk about this increased demand growth due to data center load, electrification. We need to think about the reliability implications of those new loads. And actually, we have recently established 2 task forces, one to look at large loads, the other one is to look at electric vehicle loads and understand how they're going to integrate into the system and what potential reliability challenges will be there in the system. So to conclude, we do have a number of reliability challenges as we look into the transition. We need to balance the 3 legs of the stool that I indicated at the beginning, but at the same time, the way that we do work at NERC, we work with the industry, and we get together to solve some of these difficult challenges. So as long as the industry is highly engaged with us, working and thinking through these challenges, I'm sure we'll be able to cover some of these. But ultimately, we need all your support, so I know there will be no Q&A. Happy to take questions during breaks. Send me questions or reach out if you want to engage with us a bit more. So thank you very much and have a good rest of the day.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Executive Director for the North Dakota Soybean Growers Association, Nancy Johnson.
Good morning, and thank you so much to the Chamber for inviting a person from agriculture to be part of this discussion. We know that agriculture is very dependent on electricity at farms like ours. The cooperative makes the power come on at my light switch every day, and it's a wonderful thing. As the executive director of the North Dakota Soybean Growers Association, I do work with our members on policy and advocacy. We have about 8,900 soybean operations in North Dakota, and they are planting almost 7 million acres in a given year, which is a lot of soybean acres in a state that didn't grow soybeans regularly 40 years ago. And so that is the connection between soybeans and energy. So let's start at the beginning. When did the nexus really start? In the 70s, there were a couple of fuel embargoes from Iran. If you will recall, the United States was not oil sufficient at that point in time. So when the fuel was turned off, that's the way cities looked. Gas stations in cities had rules about you could only come and get gas if you had even number or odd number license plates. You could only get so many gallons. You waited a long time in line. In rural America, unfortunately, the diesel engines that were fueling tractors that were planting crops that spring sometimes stopped because the diesel was not available. So how did ag respond? Well, first of all, ag and farmers are they're creative, they're problem solvers. And so at the time, in the 70s, there were about 3.5 million acres of sunflower in North Dakota. And there was a vision that we could solve the problem by every farmer or every neighborhood having their own tiny little crush plant where they could just get the oil out of that sunflower and put it right in their diesel engine. Meanwhile, the energy industry, of course, in North Dakota was doing a lot of work, both industry and the EERC, and Josh is going to speak after me more about what the EERC is doing. So the bottom line is a lot of research was happening because we realized that ag and energy had a demand. So how did it work out to do the sunflower oil, Well, at 100%, the diesel engines didn't love it. And so there was a lot of coking, and for those of you that may drive a diesel engine, coking of the injectors is a really not great thing, and it certainly affects the performance of the engine. And so for sunflowers, there was years of research, but in the end, it became a really focus on a food oil. So I'm going to do a little definitional stuff right now because many of you are very familiar with ethanol. You see it at the pump when you fuel your automobile. Well, all of these definitions that we're going to use, because, okay, there are many different definitions, but the definitions we're using today are from the Renewable Fuel Standard, which was part of the Clean Air Act of 2005. And so this dates back almost 20 years, but ethanol obviously is an alcohol, and if you think about your car runs more on something like vodka and your diesel engine runs more on something more like soybean oil. So there's the basic difference. But because there's a lot of incentives and there's a lot of industry need to meet specs, we had to have definitions like what is biodiesel. And obviously biodiesel mostly is used blended with petroleum diesel, where renewable diesel is a different process, which I'll get to in a moment to make it a little clearer. That is very similar to petroleum diesel. It has its own STM standard. And that petroleum diesel replacement is a drop-in fuel. It can go in the same pipelines as diesel can go, so it's a pretty interchangeable fuel. And I'm sure many of you read the newspaper this week and said, oh, somebody's going to do sustainable aviation fuel across the river in Moorhead. I have to admit that along with this presentation was done before the election on Tuesday, I have also not read up on what DG Energy is doing over in Moorhead to really understand just how they are going to approach the sustainable aviation fuel industry. So just very quickly, though, they did talk about wood products. While Minnesota has a huge wood industry, North Dakota is number 50 on forestry products, so we're probably not going to contribute a lot to this particular operation, but obviously they do have crop residues and things like that. So the vegetable oil area is the place that I'm going to go pretty heavily. Again, corn is the crop that goes primarily into the ethanols, and corn oil can go into diesel. It's a very, very versatile thing. Farmers in North Dakota have had lots of different crops that they have tried to solve the problem of how do they have locally available diesel, because remember, even in the 90s, we still, in the United States, were not self-sufficient in petroleum. So there's camelina, canola became a crop, there's crushing and biodiesel produced in North Dakota from camelina, but there's from canola, but there's really relatively few acres, so it's hard to make it a big supplier. As soybeans became a big crop, that's where we came into more of the biomass-based biodiesel. And much of the development of this industry was driven by farmers. Soybeans do have about 20% oil, and excuse me, the demand for soybean oil was relatively low we'll just go over here and use the water. The demand for the soybean meal. And so therefore, farmers said, let's not waste this soybean oil. And so they helped develop, based on some of the work that was done at NDSU a long time ago, and I see people in the audience that did some of this work also in Missouri. The whole idea of transesterification of vegetable oil, a pretty straightforward process. It turns it into a product that can be blended. Where renewable diesel is a completely different operation. If any of you have been at the plant in the Marathon plant in south of Dickinson, you can see that the hydrotreating is a big deal. Lots of hydrogen, lots more than when you do a petroleum distillation, turns a animal fat, a vegetable fat into a renewable diesel. So now you know the real difference is really how it's made. You can see soybean crush plants have been built across the upper Midwest. Many of them have been farmer and are still farmer owned. Obviously, there's also corporate and cooperative investments in all of those plants. And those plants are turning out, for the feedstocks that have gone into renewables, about 44% of the renewable is still from soybean oil. But you can see all these other recycled and waste fats are part of the future of all of the renewable non-ethanol side of the industry. So the real nexus is, you can see that all of the bigger plants, the circles really are bigger based on size. And the date is when we last had information about a location. Well, the Marathon plant in south of Dickinson, they increased the size of the operation, but it's still not nearly as big as the Phillips 66 plant on the West Coast or the Marathon Petroleum plant on the West Coast. And farmers are involved in some of the feedstock delivery. Feedstock, of course, is now the term we're using for the soybean oil. But farmers and industry have gotten together to do liquid fuels because we've been talking about what goes in the grid for the last hour. Now we're talking about what goes in a pipeline or in a vehicle. So the markets that are looking for clean fuels, because some of this is driven on demand, there's a lot of policy things here. Over the road is certainly a huge issue, the decarbonization effort that is happening on the West Coast because of all the miles that are driven in over-the-road vehicles. By using renewable diesel and biodiesel, there has been over a 75% reduction in particulate matter in the air, for instance. Aviation is going to be answered in a number of ways, clearly, but we're calling what they're doing kerosene. It's, again, part of the distillate that comes out of the refinery. Huge demand there for how do we keep a liquid fuel in an airplane because a battery might be a little tricky. Shipping and marine typically has used the bunker fuel, the most polluting fuel available, and there's now been a demand from customers to have an improved fuel for that, and renewable diesel has been a huge part of the response. Home heating, if you think of the big apartments in New York City, they're all heated by some kind of a fuel, think diesel fuel, essentially, to reduce the particulate matter in urban areas that are very, where there's a concentration of people, that there's a huge demand for having improvements in home heating. And of course, we in agriculture and construction use a lot, as do railroads. So we can see again that there are a lot of different kinds of facilities. They're mostly driven toward eventually SAF, the plant that's highlighted in the Williston area. There's been discussion on and off. They are not looking at Department of Energy capacity as much as they are looking at Department of Defense capacity. And so you see the blue bars are the increase in what the demand is being driven, and the blue bars very much are the renewable diesel. There's a big reward as part of all the policy packages. And overall, all feedstocks are increasing. So the policy stuff that we're at right now, we are hoping to understand how 45Z will work. It does have a very direct farmer involvement in how the credits are done, which in the past, under the RFS, those credits are all basically dealt with at the producer level. And so the credits are supposed to be, we're supposed to understand how we in agriculture can be involved in this and have this be successful. And we're not quite sure at this moment that the December 31st deadline is going to be met. And so at this point, we're now looking at the next round, which is the renewable volumes for the RFS, to say we can produce all of this stuff at a much higher level than there was an expectation for in the past. Again, these volumes were supposed to be announced on November 1. They have not been announced yet. They have unfortunately been up to a year late. So this circles round back to farmers and the Farm Bill are, again, part of the discussion for how does the renewable program some of the renewable program is in the IRA, which we discussed earlier, which there's certainly complications with where does that move forward. And then we have, within the Farm Bill, advancements also in funding for biofuels. And we also have a life cycle assessment issue, which the long and the short story on life cycle assessment, and we talked about it earlier in the grid, from the second that you start the process of planting a seed all the way through to the end of the fuel that's used to plant the seed, you look at what's your carbon index on that huge life cycle assessment. And Farmers have become extremely conscious of sustainability, and the soybean industry in particular has improved their sustainability dramatically in the last 15 years, again in response to customer demand. And so the life cycle assessments tend to lag by a decade, which reflects very different conditions than there are in actually happening in agriculture. So finally, the Farm to Fly Act, which is another part of the Farm Bill, again looks at SAF. SAF's going to be the most interesting thing because you saw the demand for the airline industry is just really, really huge. And the lame duck session could have some interesting things happen, or we could start all over beginning in January when we have a new Congress. So the last comment that I will just make, I see some legislators in the audience, and to explain more about these value-added fuels and just in general value-added agriculture in North Dakota, we are hosting a tour to visit the crush plant at Spiritwood and the ethanol plant at Spiritwood. And if you're interested in attending and you just haven't decided yet, there is still some room on the bus, so please see me when we are done here today. Thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Director of Energy Systems Development at the Energy and Environmental Research Center, Josh Stanislawski.
Make sure I've got my water ready to go. No, thank you for that great introduction from the voice above. It is very good to know that at least God can pronounce my name accurately, so very, very, very much comforting to see that. So, but no, thank you very much for the chamber for inviting me to be here today. Thank you for all of you for being in the room. Thank you to those that are online. For those of you that are online, we had a really great breakfast today, so I would encourage you to come in person in the future here to these events. Really great events that we have here. So what we're going to be talking about today is a thing we like to call CCUS, fact or fiction. CCUS stands for carbon capture, utilization, and storage. For those of you that know the EERC, you probably know our position on this, but we are going to take a look at the facts here today. And so for those of you that don't know the EERC, just a brief on us. We are a nonprofit branch of the University of North Dakota, about 270 full-time employees, but we don't teach, we don't have students. We are strictly focused on research and development really for the energy industry as well as for the betterment of the environment. It is nice being in my home state to give this presentation and not have to show people where the state of North Dakota is, so that's much appreciated today. We are located in Grand Forks, North Dakota, and out west is really where the heart of the North Dakota energy industry lies. That's where we do a lot of the production. That's also where we have a lot of the energy storage potential, or excuse me, a lot of the carbon capture and storage potential in the state as well. So we're going to dive into that a little bit here. So CCUS, again, carbon capture, utilization, and storage. So we're looking at a point source, like a power plant, could be coal-fired power plant, gas-fired, whatever it might be, but something that emits carbon. And we're going to take and we're going to use a technology to grab that carbon from the gas that's coming out of the plant. We're going to compress it. We're going to maybe put it in a pipeline, maybe not, depending on where the storage is located. And then we're going to put it deep underground safely and permanently. And I like to point out the U in carbon capture, utilization, and storage as a really important piece. So the U, really, we start looking at things like enhanced oil recovery. So can we take that CO2 and instead of just storing it somewhere underground, can we actually put it to work and use it for something important that can be to the benefit of everybody and certainly the state of North Dakota? So there are a couple different ways to store CO2. I'm not going to get into it, in a lot of detail here with the short amount of time I have today. But of course, if anybody has technical questions, I'm more of a technical guy, so please come talk to me after about some of the technical questions that we have. So Yeah, let's get into it here. So fact, the P Corp partnership at the EERC has been developing carbon capture utilization and storage for over 20 years. So we actually started this program all the way back in 2003. And so for a couple of decades now, the researchers at the EERC, along with really strong partnerships with the Department of Energy, the state of North Dakota, commercial entities, we've been doing a lot of great research on this. And so it's not like somebody came to us and said, yeah, let's go ahead and just store this carbon underground. This is something that we've been researching to ensure that we can do it safely and permanently for decades to come. And so we've progressed through several different phases of this P Corp partnership, and it's really exciting now because we're actually in the commercial deployment phase. So taking technology all the way from a thought to concept, now we're seeing this technology deployed commercially today. Very, very exciting times. There's a lot of partners in P Corp, so this doesn't happen by one entity alone. Over 265 sponsors of P Corp since 2002, and kind of reminds me of the old adage around breakfast. I don't know if you guys have heard this one or not before, but so when it comes to breakfast, you've got the chicken and you've got the pig, right? The chicken is involved in breakfast, but the pig is committed to breakfast, right? And so these sponsors, these are committed sponsors. These are entities that are putting financial resources into the program, helping to fund the advancement of the program. It's really great to see. Some of you are in the room today. It is just a metaphor that I'm using, nothing more intended there. The EERC has been doing research in carbon capture technology for many years. We've actually deployed some of our pilot scale systems out to the plants in North Dakota to help understand, are there challenges when you bring a carbon capture technology to a coal plant? Coal itself has the periodic table of the elements involved in it, and so you can throw a lot of contaminants and impurities at a carbon capture solvent, for example, that need to be dealt with. And so the research that we're doing, we're working with technology providers, think the Fluors of the world, those kind of people, working with them to understand, okay, is your technology going to work at this specific coal-fired power plant? And based on the data that we develop, can you then make a commercial guarantee to somebody like a Minn Kota, somebody like a Rainbow Energy to ensure that this is going to be able to go forward? So a lot of the research that we've done there has helped to enable that to happen. So facts. So we're going to start looking at some commercial deployments here, but facts. Chute Creek facility in Wyoming has been capturing CO2 from produced gas since 1986. Now this is kind of an opportunity play here where there's a high concentration of CO2, but they've been grabbing that CO2 and then transporting it to oil fields in Wyoming, Montana, North Dakota for a number of years. To date, they have stored 120 million tons of carbon dioxide underground safely and permanently with those processes, and they're currently expanding to do about 6 to 7 million tons per year. And I'm going to get to a slide here in a minute that's going to show why those volumes are important and really kind of give you some relevance on what those volumes might mean. The Great Plains Synfuels plant, and so Nancy was actually talking about the petroleum crisis. This plant was actually built in North Dakota in response to the petroleum crisis, trying to find a way to produce alternatively natural gas from coal-based resources. And that plant is still operating today, still producing natural gas. They've since diversified. They're doing a lot of fertilizers and other specialty products. But in addition to that, CO2 is also one of the products that they're selling from this plant today. They've been doing it since the year 2000. They take that CO2, they transport it north to the Weyburn oil fields in Canada, where it's used for enhanced oil recovery. So again, a project that's been going for a long time. And now very recently, within the last year, they've actually expanded to add additional storage on site right at the plant. So the geology is very favorable right under the plant. And now they are actually storing additional CO2 underground at the facility to the tune of 3 to 4 million tons a year is what they're able to store. And so to date, I think they're approaching 50 million tons of CO2 total that they've stored over the last couple of decades. And then if we look at Red Trail Energy, recently announced acquisition by Gevo to look at sustainable aviation fuel. But Red Trail Energy did start doing carbon storage from their fermenters in June 16th, 2022 was actually when the commercial injection started. And so they've been doing about 180,000 metric tons per year since that date. And again, this is another one of those great stories where you've got a plant that's located right on top of very favorable geology to do carbon storage. The EERC worked really hard with Red Trail to get those carbon storage permits from the state to ensure that we can do it safely and permanently as well in that location. There's Project Tundra that's out there. So fact is that they are nearing a financial investment decision. And it's actually really exciting for me. So I was involved with the Project Tundra team for many years, to the point where we were walking around the plant site, kind of pointing at different locations in general, saying, hey, what if we put the plant here? What if we put it there? Kind of a thing. All the way from that very basic initial concept to now they're looking at the potential to start construction of this facility in 2025. So for me, that's very exciting. Their goal is to store approximately 4 million tons a year of CO2 with that facility, and they already have all their permits in place to actually build a safely and permanently store that CO2, again, right on site or very near their site there. And so then another fact, Coal Creek Station now, that was recently acquired by Rainbow Energy. I think a lot of people in the room certainly know that, but Coal Creek Station is making investments in understanding CCUS. They're currently doing a FEED study, which is a front-end engineering design study to help understand what their potential and what their costs might be for doing carbon capture and storage there as well. And that is the largest coal-fired power plant in North Dakota. It's currently producing, or the system would capture 9 million tons of CO2 from the plant, but that plant also currently produces 1,100 megawatts of reliable baseload power for the MISO power grid. And we saw, there are reliability concerns along with the MISO power grid, so having a pathway to maintain these reliable, dispatchable resources certainly is something that's of interest to us and the state of North Dakota as a whole. And so, fact, North Dakota oil fields need CO2. And so we're looking at conventional resources here and saying, if we had 358 million tons of CO2, and I've been quoting you numbers like 9 million tons, 4 million tons per year, that sort of thing. And so we're talking decades worth of CO2 that we need, but just our conventional fields could take that much CO2 and produce 1 billion barrels of incremental oil without having to develop new fields, just utilizing our existing infrastructure. We think that's really a great thing, and I didn't have time to get into the Bakken and everything else associated with that, but so the conventional play here, 1 billion barrels of oil, 358 million tons of CO2. If we start looking at the Bakken formation and the Three Forks and the amount of CO2 it would need, we're talking like a factor of 10 higher than what I'm showing on the screen right now. So there's a lot of potential for carbon storage in this state. As time goes on, the ability to produce from the Bakken is going to be depleted, and we're going to need to find new ways and new technologies if we want to keep those resources going to be able to extract oil from the Bakken. And so CO2 enhanced oil recovery is certainly one of those things. If you're interested in the topic, happy to chat about it more at the break as well. And so then, in fact, we are on the cusp of wide-scale commercial deployment. And so that was actually a quote from the CEO of the EERC, Charlie Gorecki, addressing directly Jennifer Granholm, the current U.S. Secretary of Energy. We'll be seeing a transition there. Exciting to see who that might be. But addressing the Secretary about 3 years ago, saying we're on the cusp of commercial deployment. Well, we're no longer on the cusp of commercial deployment. We are in commercial deployment. And so the map there, of course, I'm not going to go through any of these projects in any kind of detail. I talked about a few of them, but that map just shows you the number of projects and activities that are currently going on in our region that's looking at carbon capture, utilization, and storage. And so it's really an exciting time. We've done the research to prove that it's safe and effective, and we're going to continue to develop projects in this area. And again, really for the purpose of let's make sure that we can keep providing reliable, dispatchable baseload power to those that need it most. So with that, thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
right. Well, thank you so much for that piece of it. This is the carbon sequestration piece has always been a piece for me that I'm still learning a lot about. And so we've had a great start already to the morning's program. We want to thank all of our speakers that have shared with us information so far. We're going to take a quick 10-minute break. This is about halfway through our summit, and we'll see you all back here in 10 minutes.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Midwest Energy Summit will begin in 5 minutes. Please take your seats. Once again, the Midwest Energy Summit will begin in 5 minutes. Please take your seats. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, the Midwest Energy Summit will begin in 1 minute. Please take your seats. Once again, the Midwest Energy Summit will begin in 1 minute. Please take your seats. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage the President and CEO of the Fargo-Moorhead West Fargo Chamber of Commerce, Shannon Full.
We have a great responsibility to deliver great power. Power that's reliable, affordable, adaptable. Power from coal, wind, hydro. Power that's here right now and that's ready for tomorrow. Sustainable power from renewables and carbon capture. With great versatility comes great power. We're all in on all of the above energy.
All right, welcome back, everyone, for the second half of our Midwest Energy Summit. Here we go to kick off our second half. We're going to have a panel talking more on our traditional fuels. And so, reminder to everyone on your tables, you saw those little QR codes that you can scan to get your questions. And then those of you live streaming can answer or put your questions in through the message on your live stream devices as well. So. Please help me welcome Brian Koch this morning as for our second panel, and Brian is going to moderate our event for this next session. So, thanks, Brian.
Thank you, Shannon. Well, excellent. I'm excited to be here today, and everybody says that, but I'm actually really excited to be here today. Josh Stanislawski spoke right before break, and I'm currently the Chief Research Officer up at ERC. And I'm fortunate enough to work with a whole bunch of guys and gals like Josh that just have 10-pound brains and really did a nice setup about the ERC. And so a current job there, just a little by way of me, retired from the Marine Corps, 15, 20 years ago. A recovering politician. I worked in the PSC for 8 years and brought myself here. And so my comments today, I'm going to caveat to not reflect the viewpoint of the ERC or the North Dakota Public Service Commission or those of my own thoughts, all right? That's supposed to be funny. Come on, humor. Josh told jokes, she didn't. So now also, this is the traditional panel. So I wanted to get like some kind of throwdown with the renewable panel because I think that would have, where's Shannon? We should do, that would be good. What do you think? Traditionals versus renewables?
Right
No?
after lunch, the throwdown. Right after lunch, let's do that.
No, we're talking. All right. Well, one of the things, though, I think it's really good to have the two viewpoints because we need everything, all of the above. And so I think that's the goal today is to focus on some of the traditional challenges, opportunities, and concerns. And with that, I'm just going to go right down the line and let Carl, you introduce yourself and go, and then we'll jump right into questions. So, Carl, if you want to go first.
Sure. Thank you, Brian. My name is Carl Fennessy. I'm the Vice President of Corporate Public Policy at ConocoPhillips. And I want to thank the Chamber for sponsoring this event. It's a fantastic event so far. I want to thank all of you for showing up here and all of you online. I know there's a lot of people online. Thank you also for joining us. So I'll say I'm a native Coloradan. I grew up in the mountains of Colorado, and I always appreciate North Dakota and the terrain here because I can still see home from here. So thank you so much for that. ConocoPhillips is one of the world's largest exploration and production companies, and that means we explore and produce oil and gas. So we don't do the refining, we don't do the fuels, we simply look for oil and gas in its raw form and bring it to market. We're about 10,000 people operating in about 13 countries around the globe. And as a company, we believe that the energy transition will be long. And the reason we believe that are a couple of facts, and maybe it'll set the stage for the discussion as we go forward, is if you look today in the US government and their analysis of what fuels we use today, there's as much biomass burned today as it was in the 1800s. And what we've done over the years is we've continued to add different fuel types on top of that. And with the renewables challenge we saw earlier, you see renewables coming on, but you also see demand going up. And so what you're seeing is, again, that wedge continues to grow. And we're looking to develop and produce oil and gas that meets that demand, that is a low cost and low emissions barrel that meets our investors' expectations on delivering profits on and of capital, and ultimately can do it in an environmentally sound way. And so as we go through this panel today, hopefully there'll be a number of questions from you in the audience and from the planned questions to kind of bring some of those issues forward. With that, let me turn it over to Danette.
Yes, thank you. Good morning. Danette Welsh. I'm the Director of Government Relations for ONEOK. I am a native North Dakotan, and so I really almost can see home from here. But grew up in the central part of the state, so not far. But a little bit about ONEOK. First of all, that's how you say that, for those of you who
It's not ONEOK?
Oniok, no.
ONEOK?
No, we're ONEOK. So we are a midstream company, and what that means is we don't do any exploration or production like our friends at Conoco do. We don't produce anything. We also don't distribute anything to a consumer. We don't sell anything into the marketplace as an end user. We are that middleman. We're the midstream of the whole carbon process. So we move products, and the products that we move are natural gas liquids, refined fuels like your gasoline, your diesel, your jet fuel, those sorts of things, and crude. We have a 50,000-mile network of pipelines across about 22 states here in the United States, and have access to over 50% of the refined capacity in this country. We provide natural gas gathering, processing, fractionation, transportation, and storage services to the producing community, and then also to the end market users as well. More locally here in North Dakota, we are much more known as the natural gas gathering and processing part of our business. We have over 50% of all of the production of natural gas in the Williston Basin is on ONEOK dedicated acreage. So about 7,000 miles of pipeline in western North Dakota that is gathering natural gas and taking it to our processing facilities, of which we have 12 in western North Dakota, processing about 1.9 billion cubic feet of natural gas a day. And then more locally, even more, here into the Red River Valley, we have refined fuels terminals in Fargo and in Grand Forks, as well as refined pipelines that are bringing that product into this region. And then just on the western side of the Red River in Minnesota, we have the Viking natural gas transmission line, which is bringing natural gas into communities like Grand Forks and Fargo. It starts at the Canadian border, takes itself around over the north side of the Twin Cities, and terminates in central Wisconsin. That is delivering natural gas to end users, the local distribution companies like Xcel, to provide to you in your homes and in your businesses. So that's just a snapshot of who we are across the country, as well as right here in your backyard.
Thank you, Danette. Todd?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. So, I think for me, I'm the VP of Power Supply at Mancota Power. So we are actually headquartered out of Grand Forks, and we serve basically rural eastern North Dakota and northwestern Minnesota. So we're a G&T, so we're generation transmission. We're member-owned, so we are cooperative. So we typically are selling, I would say, rural part of both eastern North Dakota and northwestern Minnesota. That being said, a lot of our load growth is actually expanding from the rural areas into the cities. So you take Cass County, which is you've heard from today, and Nodak. There's some of our larger co-ops as it relates to where the load has actually grown into those areas. So for us, we also are the operating agent for NMPA, which serves 12 municipals located throughout our service territory. So we typically refer to that as the joint system. So our joint system, really, when we look at resources, it is truly all the above. So we have roughly, I'll just round the numbers on nameplate capacity, around 55% is from coal. So these are base load dispatchable resources. We've invested in these resources. We believe they're a big part of being able to manage the volatility that we're starting to see in the market because of the addition of the renewables. So all these things are part of it. But we also have renewables in our portfolio. We have roughly around 35%. We have hydro allocation. So when we look at that, we try to make sure that for our customers that we provide both the economic side of it. We also realize we're part of a carbon managed world, but reliability has to be part of it. So I think the discussion has been really good today, where we've talked about really the energy side, which is the first part of it, and then we talked about the reliability component. You can't do one without the other. So when you look at the U.S. and our country, we have to make sure we design a system that has both the ability to realize that we're in a carbon managed world, but we need dispatchable resources that are available those times when we have these weather events. So it's finding that combination. So if you look at kind of where we were at in 2016 in the Clean Power Plan, part of the concern was we had heavy reliance in our portfolio of that was coal-based resources. So we started the pursuit of carbon capture, which we talked about. So the ERC talked about carbon capture. We've been working on the potential of having one of the largest carbon capture facilities in the U.S. It's something we've been working on for 8 to 9 years. We're getting to the point where we're to make that decision as far as, does it make financial sense? Is it the right thing in our portfolio? So one of the things it does, it provides us options. So if you start looking at being able to have to say that you're carbon free or that you're living in a carbon managed world, you're going to have resources that are both dispatchable and also reduce your carbon footprint. So one of the things we've done is try to preserve the option. Is carbon capture an option for us? And I think when you start looking at the challenges that we have, we're in a good spot of, I think we've demonstrated that the technology is there and we can do it. It just comes down to, is it the right thing to do and is it cost effective? And, and can we proceed in doing that? So those are kind of the main things where we're at, is trying to maximize the value of our assets, at the same time, realizing carbon capture potentially as part of the future.
Well, thank you, Todd. This is excellent. We've got a global company, a big regional company, and a local company, if you will. And Shannon kind of brought it up earlier today, but we had this election here the other day, right? And I'd just be curious, kind of start with you, Todd, come back the other way. Going into the election comes out. What was your first thoughts, as where you're working at, like, okay, this could change, or how's this going to affect what we're doing? But just curious what your thoughts would be now that you know the administration that's coming in. Where'd your mind go to first?
Well, the first thing is, one of the things, we had the greenhouse gas rule. So what does that mean? I think this maybe looks at things differently than it would have if it went the other way in the election. So it changes that. So, I think you have to look at it, like for us, each piece is maybe a little bit different. So we'll have to peel it back to see what it all means as it relates to a total portfolio. So I think, that's some of the challenges we have, is that we're making these long-term commitments and decisions at a time when we're going through these political cycles where it seems like the game is changing every 4 years, but we're making long-term decisions that are taking us, 5 to 10 years, not only to plan, permit, and get to a point where you actually get to where you develop it, and the rules already changed. So, I think we just got to make sure we understand kind of what we're dealing with as it relates to managing each part of our portfolio. But yeah, it changes kind of how things maybe look today versus they did maybe a week ago or a year ago.
Sure. Danette?
Sure. So we've actually been spending a lot of time over the course of the last few months thinking about what are the different election scenarios and what are the outcomes and how does that affect us. In the kind of work that we do, and I don't think this is news to anybody, I think this is probably true for everyone, having consistency, having a reliable regulatory requirement so that when you are planning out your infrastructure, and of course what we do is heavy infrastructure, you've got to know what your end goal is, and you can't keep having that end goal change every 2 years, every 4 years, based on political whim. You've got to have some consistency so that you know when you're planning what your infrastructure build out is going to look like, that investment is going to pay off, because ultimately every cost that you put into your investment, into your infrastructure investment, comes back to the consumer in the end. So trying to manage consumer costs is a big piece of long-term planning, and long-term planning is very much dependent on the regulatory and the policy schematic that you're working within, and having massive changes in that, whether that's additions or deletions, really just creates volatility that is not good for the end consumer.
Just before we get to Carl, follow up to that. You work in several different states. How do you look at the state policies that may or may not differ, and how does that tie in? I know the certainty, but all states are all kind of different.
So, yeah, you're right. You know, you don't have to go very far from where we're sitting right now to have a very different political environment.
You mean
right?
Canada? Or?
Yeah. I don't know. We don't work in Canada, but yeah.
Oh, okay. Just curious to get the jets
yeah,
up there.
Yeah. So the reality is that that is one of the things. I mean, folks like Carl and I working in the government relations kind of realm. That's kind of the thing that we concentrate on day in and day out. Is that we're talking to those policymakers at the state level. The regulators at the state level, as well as the federal level, to help them understand the impacts of the decisions that they're making. So as you look at requirements for different types of fuels, that has an effect on the viability of our infrastructure and the use of our infrastructure. I might get a little deep into something here that maybe isn't where you wanted to go, but just a little bit of an understanding of how our using refined fuels as the example of how that system works. Say you put a product, a diesel product into the line in Houston, and the demand for that product is in Fargo. It's much like banking, where if you got a kid in college 5 states away and they need money, you put money into their account and they can take it out. It's not the same dollar bill, but it's still constructed the same way, it's still used the same way. That's very much the way that our system works. It's fungible, that we can put product into the pipe in Houston and you can take it out in Fargo, generally speaking, about the next day because of the way that transaction happens. So as you continue to diversify the types of products that go through those pipelines, and we batch, so pipelines are not just dedicated to one type of product. We move all the types of product through the same pipeline, right? Generally speaking. As you diversify the kinds of fuels that are required to be delivered into certain areas, even when there's not necessarily a consumer demand for that type of fuel, it chips away at the efficiencies of your infrastructure and the overall cost effectiveness of the service that you're providing. So it's an impactful situation where you have different state governments making different requirements, and just using fuel as the example, it really can take away from the efficiency that we currently have in helping consumers manage their costs.
Gotcha, thank you. Carl, what were your thoughts after the election for your company?
Sure, let me actually build on some of the themes that were talked about already. As an oil and gas company, just like actually any energy company, or almost any company, fiscal and regulatory stability are really key. And so as we look at the new administration, we're really looking for, the fiscal stability and the regulatory stability. You don't need to take a sledgehammer to everything that was done, but let's be smart about it. Let's look at what works, what doesn't work, and let's use that scalpel to clean things up, or to make them so they actually do work and the results you actually want are achievable in a cost-effective manner. So I think as we look at the new administration, we look at our priorities are probably around taxes. Our priorities are around regulatory reform, including tort reform. I think renewables, no matter what form of energy you have now, one of the challenges we face today is, you might get your permit and then you spend the next 10 years in court. I think renewables are also finding that. Energy companies of all sorts are challenged with that problem. So looking at that permitting reform is really crucial. And then the last one, which seems maybe a bit industry specific, is around LNG exports and the resumption of LNG export permitting. And while that may seem like a Gulf Coast issue or a very niche issue, the reality is we're going to be, with some acquisitions we've done, the second larger producer of oil and gas in North Dakota next year. And with that is this concept of this pipeline and this fungibility of that. So what happens in North Dakota matters around the world. Not only does it bring low-cost, secure energy to the U.S. for all of us, but it also allows the U.S. to project power and to support its allies overseas through exports. If you take the Russian invasion in 2022, the U.S. was able to increase its exports to Europe by 124% in a very short amount of time. And that's because of the work done here in North Dakota, which supplies a huge amount of oil and gas to the U.S., allowing other producers closer to the Gulf Coast to send that overseas and project that power for the U.S. And so, again, this system is built so that there's a great exchange around the globe of all these products back and forth, even though we're now a net energy producer in the U.S., which is a position we never dreamed of when Nancy was talking about 1979 and the gas shortages. The dream was always to be energy independent. We have achieved that thanks to the hard work in North Dakota and across the U.S. And now that changes how we need to manage and project that. And so as we looked at this administration, I think we'd be looking, that'd be the third thing we look towards, is how do we secure that energy stability in the U.S., the low prices in the U.S., and then utilize that around the globe.
That's awesome, Carl. I mean, that's like the best answer I've heard in a long time. I mean, I got a note here about energy security is national security, and I was going to pull that thread a little bit more. But as you're talking, I'm looking at Tony Clark, who I used to work with in the PSC, and then he was a FERC commissioner for many years, and they did LNG terminals, his time in the FERC. But let's get on just a little bit farther. So you've got a global footprint, right? The geopolitical situation around the world. I mean, you tied some strings to how North Dakota fits into that, but when you look at what's going on around the world, how do we tie that back as more opportunity, or what's your concerns? And I mean, it's a big world out there, but North Dakota is the solution to a lot of these challenges, I think. How do you look at some of that from your perspective, all the way up here and then back to North Dakota in the Midwest?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and it is one of the challenges the industry faces. So let me start just with North Dakota. North Dakota has a couple of things to its advantage. It has an amazing workforce that is here in the state. And we talked, there's some discussion earlier about the labor needs. That's always something that as a company we're looking at. We look at each year and say, where are we going as a company? What are the labor, what are the skills we need? And how do we make sure that we can work with communities and stakeholders, with our peer companies to build that institutional, that resiliency within the state of North Dakota. So that's one thing. North Dakota is also very fortunate to have amazing minerals. I think they just passed 5 billion barrels of oil equivalent produced in North Dakota, which is a huge number. And the DOE says there's another 3 to 4 billion. We'd say there's probably more 7 to 10 billion still that's recoverable in North Dakota. So we're still early on in what can North Dakota do to supply low-cost, low-emission barrels to the U.S. and around the globe. The third thing that they have is what we've talked about earlier, is a stable fiscal and regulatory regime. And that really allows us to make long-term plans for some of these LNG plants, for some of the pipeline investments that are needed, for some of the power plant investments that are needed. And as you look at that, North Dakota is pivotal in all of that. What does that allow us to do? As a country, then we can say, okay, if we're an exporter, now let's see where we can take advantage of low cost, low supply material that keeps it low here in the U.S. for consumers, but also now bring that to different regions. And as a company, we've begun to get more involved in the LNG terminals. We've got about 4 million metric tons a year now we bring into Europe. We've got contracts for. We're looking at opportunities in Mexico to take LNG out the other side. What it allows the country to do is, as I said earlier, it allows the country to not only insulate itself from the shocks and some of the conflict that's going on currently in the Middle East, but allows you then to help your trading partners. Our world, we talk about AI demand and the AI electricity demand. Well, that comes from chip makers. Chip makers are in Taiwan. Taiwan depends on huge amounts of LNG to be imported. And so U.S., North Dakota, U.S., Taiwan allows that AI revolution to take place. So the industry is able to support and make all kinds of things happen. And I think sometimes we lose sight of that or don't recognize that. I think one of the earlier speakers said that electricity is that bottom 5% of the economy. Without it, the rest of the economy struggles. And oil and gas is the same way. Along with the renewables, we're that base that everything else really builds off of.
No, thank you, Todd. I was thinking, you're talking strategic up here. I like the discussion, but I was thinking of Todd at Minn Kota, right? Back when I'm a politician, you walk into a Cenex station, and if you can't talk to the young man or ladies at the Cenex station, explain to them how this works and how this benefits them, they're throwing you out of town. Right. And so you're back at Minn Kota, you're trying to figure out, well, let's see, what's the rules on coal and wind, and how do you have consistency for your board? I mean, as you're looking at the energy mix, how do you look at your board, your customers? How do you plan, and how do you bring them with you? One thing planning in the boardroom, but another thing going out and talking to your board members and the mayors and everybody else.
Well, I think what we do is we try to educate. So we continue to try to inform individuals of what we're looking at and why we're looking at it. So if you look at all the different technology, understanding what your options are. So today you want to create a portfolio that's diverse. And our view is like every fuel and every resource has, I would say, things that they do well and things that they struggle with. You can take coal, for example. It's a very good baseload resource. It helps you meet your demands. It's a reliable, you don't have the volatility on the fuel side of it, but it doesn't follow like market volatility really well as it relates to, like you see ups and downs in the market because of the saturation of renewables. Natural gas does a really good job of that. So trying to find that mix of resources. So like for us, we don't have natural gas in our portfolio, but we have a very extensive demand response program, which actually works really well with our wind. So what you do is you try to make sure that you're trying to have that balance. So we talk about three-legged stool. You have to have the ability to have a mix of resources that provide reliable power to meet your demands and to actually take out some of the risk of the market volatility. So it's one thing to be able to have electricity, those times when the wind isn't there. But if you're exposed to that market, can you financially sustain yourself when the market has that much volatility? So you start looking at maybe the average price does not change that much, but you can get to where you get like an event like Uri, and all of a sudden financially you're not able to sustain the costs associated with that. So for us, it's trying to find that blend and mix of resources that doesn't expose you to the amount of volatility that it's going to be out there, and it's only going to get worse. And then you have to make sure that you have the ability to meet your members' needs as far as both being reliable and affordable. I think it's good that we talk about the reliability piece. I think sometimes we get locked in on the just how to manage the carbon aspect of it. But there's a reliability component is that what we're seeing and what Nurka was talking about is, as you see that change in the last 5 years, that's a small sample of the amount of resources that have retired. So if you look at the projections that are out there as far as future retirements, that's a different story. So when you look at all these things, the speed at which things are changing and the speed at which the expectations are that you're going to be able to build and replace resources, I think they're out of line. So you're going to have to make sure that you pace yourself so that you're not putting all your eggs in one basket and you're trying to make sure you have assets for the future.
You bring up a great point where people think this is the app generation, right? Well, let's just get an app to build a nuke plant. Let's just get an app for a wind farm. It doesn't take very long. And they don't understand how long it takes from, I think one of the previous panelists, from idea to actually having something in the ground. And so when you're looking at those things, back to, you have distribution co-ops. Obviously, you've got Cass County Electric here, NODAC. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure they want some stability too. And so how much do you look at what they're looking for? Because you passed, not the best word, those prices mow on to them too. I mean, correct. How do you balance that?
Well, and I think that's what we're doing. So obviously, we're owned by them. So we're trying to do what's best interest for our members. And you ask
you're
them
in Minnesota too, right?
Yeah. So like for us, we're in 2 states, 2 dramatically different views of the world as it relates to what resources should supply load. So you look at North Dakota, which all of our resources are in North Dakota, so it actually makes it easier for us for planning purposes. But if you look at Minnesota, and they're going down the road of looking at 100% basically carbon-free. The only way they can do that is if other regions provide resources to them. So they're not an energy-producing state. And they do, but you start looking at trying to build a nuclear facility, you start looking at trying to build a natural gas facility, that's going to be very difficult in the state of Minnesota. So for us, you start looking at the challenges, even just the 2 states and having the membership. It's maybe not split 50-50, but it even creates challenges within the membership as it relates to when one state is putting additional costs on the other members. So these are challenges that we face, is that even though we're only in 2 states, there are 2 dramatically different views as far as what resources should be used to manage that load obligation.
Sure. So Danette, I'm thinking about ONEOK, and you and I have talked a lot about the term energy transition, and I think it makes your head blow up, because you're like, that's not a term you like. I'd be curious if you could maybe elaborate on that, and then how ONEOK looks at keeping some stability and cost for your people too.
Sure. Well, okay.
I just had to throw it out there.
Yes,
it's late in the
yes,
day. Let's talk
yes.
turkey here.
I appreciate that, and I'm going to try to try to frame this nicely. So I think there are a lot of words that people use that they mean the same thing by using those words. But words matter. They don't all mean the same thing. We're very intentional corporately about using the word transformation as opposed to transition. And the reason for that is that transition implies you're moving away from something to something else and not going back, right? Transformation to us means that you are taking what you have, where you are today, and you're finding new ways to use that. So when you think about the types of energy that we have being very broad, traditional fuels, renewable fuels, nuclear, each of those has their own unique set of challenges, right? Traditional fuels are challenged by carbon management, by what are our emissions, how are we managing that piece of our product. Renewables, of course, are challenged by reliability. And nuclear has the challenge of maybe consumer confidence and cost. Each of those sectors continues to work on addressing what their issues are and how to overcome those. And when it comes down to, I mean, just thinking about the growth of the energy demand just domestically that we talked about earlier this morning, you can't meet that with any one sector. We need all of those sectors to be able to meet those demands. But then think about it globally, and the fact that there is a great deal of the world's population that is energy poverty, and they're looking to improve their lives. So the reality is that while we may shut down coal here in the United States, that is literally a baseload fuel that these emerging areas of the rest of the world need to bring themselves into a better living condition. There's just a reality that it's going to take all kinds of power sources to be able to meet that demand globally, but also domestically as we look at that growth load. And so we really do feel that transformation, energy addition, as I believe our Congresswoman-elect uses, those are really real words that matter because it's a real reality for really the whole world.
So how does ONEOK look at keeping the pricing stable?
So interestingly, with the midstream sector, our piece of the consumer cost is generally speaking is the transmission cost, the transportation cost. So using just a gallon of fuel that you put in your car yesterday, when I put gas in my car, I think it was $3, right? Of that $3, for our transportation costs, you're looking at about 6 cents. So it's not a big piece of the overall cost to the consumer, but every time that we have an increase in our cost, that's an increase to the consumer. So as I said in kind of some of my opening comments, being able to manage what our costs look like, and remembering, of course, that we're FERC regulated, so all of our costs have to be justified, they have to be reasonable, we are regulated. And in addition to that, there is no form of transportation that is more efficient and more effective than pipelines for any liquid or gas product. So keeping those things in mind, it is important for us to manage our costs by working hard to maintain a very stable regulatory environment that is not going to impact our infrastructure requirements, the things that we have to build out that ultimately add cost to our transportation fees.
Perfect. Carl, you had a follow-up?
Yeah, I just want to build on that because I think, in a way, the argument's a bit oversimplified. And so one of the arguments we hear is, well, you know, if Minnesota's right and they're able to get to 100% renewable and everyone else is, and we're going to electrify transportation, well, we don't need oil and gas or traditional energy sources. And, you know, the pipelines they're going to build are going to be stranded. It's not of value to put those in there. So, you know, we really shouldn't be investing in oil and gas and pipelines now. But the reality is 70 to 80% of hydrocarbons are used for things other than energy and transportation. And I think we often forget that piece of it. And so I take the example of a vehicle, and you talk about putting gasoline in your car. So if you drove here, whether you drove here in an electric vehicle or in an internal combustion engine, the surface you drove on, asphalt, oil and gas product. The tires you rode on, artificial rubber, oil and gas product. The panels of your car, plastics, oil and gas products. The fluids around the battery components, all oil and gas products. The engine itself, if you're burning it, oil and gas products. So there's a huge demand for oil and gas. Farmers, fertilizer, massive demand for oil and gas. It's not easily replaceable with something else. And so it's really important that as we talk about a stable regulatory and fiscal environment, is recognizing these long-term investments are needed, even if we're able to electrify with all renewables and change the transportation fleet, you still need these investments, and it produces a huge number. I think in North Dakota, around 50,000 high-paying jobs that are going to be here for a long time. And so I think that, again, I think the argument is a bit oversimplified when we talk about just the demand for electricity, but I think it's important to keep in mind that we need these products for a number of things, and there aren't good substitutions for them at scale.
Perfect, thank you. We'll have about 5 minutes left, and I was thinking maybe just come down the line, start with Todd about, when you look forward, what do you think is the biggest opportunity? Maybe throw in there the biggest challenge for all three of you, and then we'll wrap her up.
I think the biggest opportunity is, we talked on, we do see load growth. I mean, we went for a long period where there wasn't much for load growth. So I think, I think we need load growth. I mean, I think that's a positive, but it has to be in a manageable way. So I think it's also one of the bigger challenges as well. So if you start talking about even some of the things we talk about AI, we're a 1,000 megawatt system, and it's nothing for us to get a request to put 1,000 megs of AI on. It took us 50 years to build our system. So this idea that we can switch and to do these things as it relates in like 5 years or 10 years, to me, I think the biggest challenge we have is the time to be able to accomplish some of the things we're looking at. And one of the things we haven't talked a lot about today is transmission. So you're going to need a lot more transmission to increase the reliability of the grid, to be able to add additional resources. So I think one of the opportunities and challenges is on the transmission side. I think that's, I think typically you can have a conversation that could have been this whole time frame just dedicated to transmission, because you need that backbone to be able to add resources. So I think that's part of it.
It's interesting to say that, because we've had some discussion around the ERC about who'd ever thought someone would go buy 3 Mile Island. Somebody just did, right?
Yes.
So will somebody come into North Dakota and say, I'm going to do this all behind the meter and build a big, whether it's a coal plant or natural gas combined cycle, and you collect the rare earth elements out of the coal, and you do all these things, and you all do it behind the meter, and you have your own data center there. I mean, I think there's some things that are going to happen in the state that we've never seen before. And that might be one of them, because we're a state that has the generation, and you maybe don't need the transmission as long as you can get the bits and bytes out. But it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of talk of that, but I think at the same time they want the reliability of being part of an interconnected system.
Sure.
So the minute they interconnect, it changes that concept. Right. But there is that idea that a lot of this can be behind the meter, and so I think that is a big shift as far as what we're going to see as far as the management of some of these large loads.
Perfect. Danette, where's One Oak going to be in 5 years?
Still moving products through pipelines, sir.
And don't forget to call before you dig. It's important.
Absolutely, yes. So I think probably our number one challenge in the pipeline world is the build out of infrastructure. It's becoming increasingly difficult to be able to build pipelines for whatever reason in whatever place. People are either tired of them, or they're scared of them, or just simply don't want them. So I think that's probably our biggest challenge, is that we have to continue to work on education of individuals about the benefits and the need for pipelines.
Keep it local so they understand in a Senex station.
Yes, indeed, indeed. I think one of our biggest opportunities is innovation. At the end of the day, there is no industry, I don't believe, that has been as innovative over the course of its existence as the oil and gas industry has been. Just the things that, the transformation that has happened within this industry over the course of the last 50 years, even within just the last 10 years, is unbelievable. So I really do think the opportunities that lie ahead of us are all wrapped up around innovation.
Thanks, Danette. Carl, bring us home.
Well, I would reinforce really what we've heard here. I think education is one of the biggest challenges we have, and it's educating not only the communities we work in, the companies we work with, but also other sectors, the financial sector, others, about how does energy transformation play a long-term role as you look at what fuels will be used. And the answer is going to be different in different regions. And so to apply New Mexico idea of what energy looks like to North Dakota doesn't make sense. Well, neither does applying a US-centric view on what it should look like in Asia. And so we have to really be flexible in that. And so the challenge for us is around how do we offset that? And it's really probably engagement and increasing the engagement. Traditionally, as an industry, we are a bit remiss to engage, but I think we need to do that and have those crucial conversations, to have that conversation at the gas station. You know, we're proud we've started in Dickinson, in Killdeer, and Watford City, 3 community engagement groups where we spend time listening to what are the community needs. And it's not just about oil and gas necessarily, but it's about, you know, the education, it's about their highways, it's about traffic, and then what can we do to participate that? And I think, so just engaging, you know, the local communities, engaging our peer companies and understanding their needs, engaging other sectors to understand what their pressures are, and working together to find solutions is really going to be crucial moving forward. Otherwise, by the time you realize what you've done, it's too late.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Shannon, and your crew, Caleb and Peyton, and for helping us all out. So maybe a round of applause for the panelists, and thank you all for coming.
What does it take to power a rapidly changing world? At Xcel Energy, it means being there for our customers day in and day out. It means delivering safe and reliable energy no matter what's happening in the world. Whatever the day or night brings, our crews show up for our customers. And we'll continue to do so while keeping bills lower than the national average. That's our commitment. We're also committed to our clean energy future by developing new and better ways to generate and deliver energy. To get us to our ambitious clean energy goals, we're investing in new tech, finding innovations to ensure a brighter tomorrow. We're also continually strengthening our grid and building resilience, all while keeping our focus on safely providing an essential service to our customers and communities. And as a member of the communities we serve, Xcel Energy knows the important role we play in helping those places thrive. Our employees show up year-round to make our communities stronger, safer, and more vibrant. Because we believe being an energy provider in a rapidly changing world means steadily powering the communities, businesses, and people who are making the world a better place for all of us. That's what we call putting good energy into action.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back to the stage Regional Vice President of Regulatory at Xcel Energy, Bria Shea.
Thank you. Good morning again. I just want to say thanks to everybody again for being here, taking part of your morning to join us. As I mentioned on my panel, I just really appreciate the opportunity to have these conversations with such a broad set of stakeholders. So I also want to thank Shannon and the entire chamber team from our participant perspective. I think this is the most organized and thoughtful event I've been to in a long time. It is down to the minute and they're keeping everybody on track. So appreciate that. And to keep that energy going and the momentum that we've got from this morning, we're going to close it up with a really exciting keynote speaker with Tony Clark, soon to join us on stage. Tony is the Executive Director-elect of the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners. So beginning in January of 2025, Tony will officially lead the association that represents utility regulators across the nation, a really critical role at a pivotal time in our industry, as we've been discussing this morning. Tony brings a wealth of experience in public utility regulation and energy policy on both state and national stages. Appointed by the President and unanimously confirmed by the U.S. Senate, Tony served as a commissioner of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission from 2012 to 2016. Additionally, he served nearly 12 years as a North Dakota Public Service Commissioner, elected by the people of North Dakota in 2000 and again in 2006. His leadership in public service has been characterized by a commitment to transparency, regulatory excellence, and a deep understanding of the complex challenges facing the energy sector. Following his time in public service, Tony joined the firm of Wilkinson, Barker, and Nauer as a senior advisor. In his role, he advised clients on intricate regulatory and policy issues, and thought leadership and energy policy continue to shape conversations nationwide. A frequent speaker and writer on energy topics, Tony has shared his expertise with numerous committees, including the U.S. House, the U.S. Senate, and various state regulatory commissions. Earlier in his career, Tony served as North Dakota's labor commissioner under Governor Schaefer, and also as a state legislator representing the city of Fargo in the North Dakota House. His educational background includes an undergraduate degree from NDSU and a Master of Public Administration from the University of North Dakota. Additionally, Tony currently serves as the independent director for Northwestern Energy Group, a position he will hold until December 2024. His dedication to the energy industry and vast experience with regulatory matters make him uniquely positioned to lead us in tackling the future of utility regulation. Now, making his third appearance at the Midwest Energy Summit, we continue to rely on his expertise and insights that help guide these vital conversations. It's my pleasure to introduce Tony Clark, whose guidance today will help us navigate and better understand the road ahead. Please join me in welcoming Tony to the stage.
Thanks, Bria. Well, thank you, Bria, for that very nice introduction. It's great to be back home, and it's been good to see so many friends and former colleagues. I have to say thank you to Brian Kalk for the shout out earlier today. I'll tell you one quick story about Brian. Like any sort of Scandinavian North Dakotan, for a long time, I've been a day-long coffee drinker, right? I always kept it black coffee. Make sure it's hot and strong, keep me awake, keep me warm through the winter. So one day, I'm sitting up there, we're having a hearing at the commission. I'm up on the dais, and Brian was new to the commission, and I look over, and here's this tough, retired Marine, drives a Harley, and I look, he's got a bunch of those little, hazelnut coffee creamers, and he's dumping them into his coffee, and I thought, well, gosh darn, this is absolutely outstanding. If a retired Marine can flavor his coffee, I'm gonna do it too. So Brian turned me on to the world of flavored coffees. I want to thank you, Brian, for that revelation that I've had now for a few years. It's great to be able to talk about this topic, energy and where energy is going, especially in North Dakota, where the energy sector is such a big deal. All right, we're going to jump right into it, because this is a big topic. So there are what I would classify as 4 major trends in energy. And when I say energy today, I'm talking primarily about the electricity sector. I won't talk a lot about exploration and production and a number of other things. This is really about electricity demand that I'll be talking about today. There are 4 key trends that are driving the conversation and a lot of decisions about what is going to happen with the electricity grid moving into the future. And we'll talk about each of these in order. Number 1, rapid demand growth. And these are all happening at the same time, simultaneously converging against each other, which is making for some very difficult decisions. So number 1, rapid demand growth. At number 2, the very time that you're having a large-scale retirement of a number of dispatchable units. And the replacement generation that's coming online has very different attributes than the units that are retiring. Number 3, a carbon-constrained policy environment. And we're going to talk about this. It changes administration to administration, but really the long-term arc in terms of carbon constraint is there, and it's probably there to stay for a number of reasons. And then number 4, there is no easy button solution to replace what's retiring with zero carbon resources, at least in the near term. And it's the timing of the issue that we're going to be talking about. Okay. Number 1, rapid demand growth. We have heard a lot about this morning already, and it's an appropriate discussion. If you went to one of these conferences probably 2 years ago, you didn't hear a lot about data centers. You didn't hear a lot about AI. In the last 18 months, this topic has exploded because folks are realizing just how much demand is driven by the transformation into AI and what that means for data centers. So to give you a little bit of idea of the amount of demand growth that we're talking about system-wide, and then we'll start talking specifically about data centers. But system-wide, in 2022, so only 2 years ago, the estimate was there was going to be about 2.5% growth over the next 5 years for electricity. And that was actually a really big number at that time. For decades, the standard in the electricity industry is it's a kind of flat to about maybe 0.5% growth a year, maybe 1% if you were in a really strong demand growth area, but a pretty stable system for the most part with very predictable growth over time. So 2.5% growth was an eye-opener for a lot of folks. 2023, estimates doubled almost to about 4.5% growth over that same period. They thought we would grow over the next 5 years. Just this year, ICF just recently released a report that they think there'll be 9% growth by 2028 in the electricity sector. So it is exponentially growing in terms of demand, again, at the same time that we've seen a lot of retirements going on in the system. Data centers. Data centers alone, EPRI, the Electric Power Research Institute, estimates that today data centers account for about 4% of total electricity demand in the US. They think by 2030, that's going to more than double to 9% of the entire electricity grid being devoted to demand centers or to data centers. To put that in perspective, like how much electricity is this? Consider this. So data center usage can be a little bit tough to get your hands on. A lot of the companies sort of hold pretty tightly how much energy they're actually using. But by the best estimates that I could find, Google uses about, like Google together, uses about the entire energy usage of the entire state of North Dakota. Now, some folks might step back and say, well, North Dakota's a relatively small state in terms of population. Put that in perspective. North Dakota actually punches way above its weight in terms of electricity consumption, primarily driven by the Bakken and the amount of electricity that's needed out there. North Dakota, despite having about the same population as South Dakota, uses twice as much electricity as South Dakota does. Compared to Minnesota, Minnesota is what, 6-7 times the population of North Dakota, but only uses about double the energy of the state. So that's Google alone. Add on to that Meta, AWS, go down the list, and you start to get a sense for how big this is. Just one simple AI-generated search on the internet probably uses 4 or 5 times the power that just a traditional search that's used would. So we're talking about a massive amount. In addition to that, you have other segments of the industry that are increasing the load growth. You didn't hear as much about EVs probably in the last year as you did in the few years leading up to it. EV adoption has been a little slower than folks thought, and it depends on what part of the country you're in. If you're in a northern climate, North Dakota, Minnesota, EV adoption naturally is probably going to be a lot slower than it is, say, in Southern California or even on the East Coast. And it's just because the battery technology and how quick they're drawn down and how quick it takes to recharge is more difficult in a cold weather climate. But the growth is going to be there. Bank of America estimates that this year about 8% of sales are EVs, and they estimate that by 2027 it'll be about 14%, and maybe about 1/3 of all cars nationwide by 2030. Will it be that fast or slower? I don't know, it's anybody's guess, but it will be growing for sure. Thinking about how much demand does that put on the system, if you have kind of an average driver, 12,000 to 15,000 miles a year, it's probably adding something like 400 kilowatt hours a month to your usage. We used to always say when we'd estimate bill impacts at the North Dakota Commission, an average user was something like 1,000 kilowatt hours a month. Some use much more, some use much less. But think about that in terms of what that means once you adopt an EV to your household electricity usage, and then start multiplying that across many houses. Things like heat pumps. That adds about what an EV would to your house in terms of load. Again, about 400 kilowatt hours a month. Colder weather climates more, warmer weather climates less. It'll be slower to adopt in some regions of the country than in others, but the heat pump technology is getting much, much better and progressively is getting closer to even some pretty cold weather climates. So you're talking about a large amount of demand growth any way that you cut it. It's really electrification of everything in a lot of ways, which is kind of a blast of the past when you think about it. when I would campaign door to door in my district in North Fargo, I don't know if some of you have seen these houses. There was a generation of houses probably built in about the 1960s that were electric-only houses, and you'd go door to door, and every house in the neighborhood had like a medallion on the side of it that said all-electric house, because there was this theory that electricity was going to be, the word was too cheap to meter, right? We'd produce electricity so cheaply that you wouldn't even be charged for it. Of course, that didn't pan out, but the push was for electrify everything during that period of time, and then we sort of backed off that. And in a lot of states, especially spurred by state public policy, there is, again, this push to electrify everything, and it comes from climate goals at this point. All right, so big demand growth happening at the same time that there have been large-scale retirements of dispatchable generation. This is one chart from the EIA that gives an estimate of nationwide how many retirements there'll be, and these are primarily dispatchable. And when I say dispatchable, it means that an engineer somewhere can push a button, ramp up, ramp down in a relatively quick time frame, not weather dependent. It's a lot of retirements that are being planned, and you know, if you think about supply and demand, that's a very tough equation to meet. A successor of mine at FERC, a commissioner by the name of Mark Christie, testified in front of the U.S. House not too long ago, and his quote was, "When you look at the trend of retirements and demand growth, the math doesn't add up." And I think that's exactly the issue, is the math somewhere does not add up between where the trend lines are moving in the country. Okay, carbon-constrained policy environment, sort of regardless of who is in the White House. Now, the pressure on industry may change depending on who's in the White House, what the administration is, but there are a lot of levers here that tend to push in one direction. So you've got different administrative agencies that have been promulgating rules. We heard an earlier speaker talk, and I think it was exactly right, about utilities and investors are trying to make 10, 15, 20-year decisions at the same time that policy is changing every 4 years. It makes for a very difficult policy environment. Energy policy tends to move sort of like an oil tanker. It does not take sharp turns. It takes a long, long time to implement change. Even with the Trump administration coming in new, if they start promulgating rules on day one, it will take years for those to go through the rulemaking process because of the statutory requirements in the law. They will be litigated for years. So the policy environment moves very, very slow in Washington, although in the near term, it will have some impact on different projects depending on where they are at. But US EPA has rulemakings out, US SEC has had rulemakings out. Corporate buyers, which is why I have the picture of Wall Street there, are driving a lot of the decisions about what utility companies are doing in terms of their investment and what corporate buyers want in terms of where their energy is sourced from. So Wall Street, regardless of what happens in any presidential election, is going to continue to have some of these pressures brought to the energy sector. Got a picture of the Minnesota Capitol there. We've talked about this morning kind of the differences in policies between different states in the region. Those state-level policies are not going to change quickly, and they could diverge from what the federal policy is. There's a picture of the Supreme Court, and then the courts sort of oversee it all, and the litigation that can play out in the courts can take years, if not, close to upwards of a decade to work its way through the court system. So the general trend line is pretty clear on this, which is that in general, a carbon-constrained future is probably a reality. And that feeds into number two, there is no easy near-term zero-carbon capacity replacement that's available out there. This is a near-term problem. As I said, the arc, we can kind of generally predict what the arc is. The near-term issue of trying to meet rapid demand growth, because remember, the load that's coming online, data centers or EV load, it's not kind of like traditional load which grows slowly over time and a utility company can plan for. It's like 500 megawatts at once, can you get us up and running in 18 months? We haven't planned for that sort of system before. So trying to achieve fix all of the first three things while not having an easy replacement is really, really tough. So, run through what I've got up here. Nuclear. Lots of folks point to nuclear as a possible solution, and it can be done, theoretically, right? France runs, I think it's over 80% on nuclear power. Carbon-free, we know the technology, but licensing it and financing it is really, really tough. There's only been one new advanced reactor that's been brought online in decades, and it just opened here recently. Southern Company in Georgia, AP1000 reactor, but it took years longer than they thought it would, and it took billions of dollars more than they thought it would. From a utility investment standpoint, it's very difficult to go out on a limb and invest that kind of money without some sort of assurance that you're going to be able to get a return on it. So the good news is we now sort of have a workforce that's trained to build reactors like that. The bad news is we have to build a few more reactors to keep them engaged and involved in it, or else you're starting from ground zero all over again trying to do a project like that. The licensing takes forever. Small modular reactors are something that's talked about an awful lot, holds a lot of promise. While there are probably only a few utility companies large enough in the country for their balance sheets to be able to carry something like a large nuclear reactor and get it up and running and build it, there are a lot of utilities that would love to invest in some sort of technology where you can put 250 megawatts here and 180 megawatts there, and you can sort of plunk it in the grid in areas where you've got open or available transmission space. That has a lot of promise, but there aren't any of those reactors out there right now. It's in the development stage, it's in the licensing stage. That looks like, maybe a 10-year, a 15-year solution. The next 5 years, there aren't going to be SMRs, small modular reactors, that are available. Wind, solar, a lot of wind and solar have gone in over the last few years. But remember, wind and solar aren't exactly a one-for-one replacement of a dispatchable plant. Their capacity factors are different. You have to have a lot of transmission to make it work. You have to have sometimes battery storage to help make it work. There are all sorts of things that go along with some of those renewables that are just different than they are from the units that they're replacing. As a number of speakers have said, if you want a big renewable build out, you gotta have a lot of transmission to make that work. We do a ponderously slow job of building transmission in the US. And any major transmission project is probably a 10-year, maybe a 15-year sort of investment from studying it, doing the engineering, going through the permitting, and constructing. So unless there's permitting reform, transmission isn't going to get built fast. In the next 5-8 years, it's going to be very difficult to make that happen. So there's just not the in-the-box solution that we have right now over these next few years to deal with the challenges that we have. All right, so what is this confluence of rising demand and supply that's constrained been meaning in recent years? This is a chart from EIA. It's from 2015 to about present day. Average retail price of electricity monthly. These are percentage increases. You can see from 2015 until about 2021, basically flat. The reason that was basically flat is because of the story in energy in the United States and really globally over the last 50 years, the biggest story, which is the evolution of shale gas. With cheap shale gas, we were able to buy ourselves a lot of time in terms of where the grid is moving at a very affordable cost. There was a ton of money put into things like transmission and other upgrades. The headroom that bought that, being able to do it without seeing electricity prices spike, was bought by natural gas. That's what allowed that to happen. So what happens in 21? Inflation starts kicking in, natural gas prices spike. The other thing that you're seeing starting in 2021 is transmission costs are starting to rise as more and more money is plugged into transmission. Those costs rise for the last few years in PJM, which is the nation's largest regional transmission organization. It basically covers the mid-Atlantic through kind of Ohio into Chicago. PJM, the transmission portion of the bill was larger than the capacity, the generation capacity part of the bill. That's how much transmission had started growing. So you start seeing that kick into those rates, and now rates are, have jumped 25%, probably over the last 4 years. So you're starting to see these supply-demand conditions really start to impact electricity prices. All right, you want to look at the smart folks on Wall Street who are paid to look at these kind of things? These are the stock charts for 4 of the largest, what we call IPPs, independent power producers or merchant generators in the US. Now I put these up rather than utility companies like Xcel or MDU or Otter Tail because they react very differently to supply-demand conditions. Ironically, if you were to look at a regulated utility company, rising electricity prices do not correlate to their stock price very well because regulated utility companies, if the commodity cost is going up, don't actually make any money on that. Those are pass-through charges. They don't make any money on them. They don't lose any money on them. Actually, it can have a very converse impact on their stock price because if bills are rising on the part of the bill that they don't make money on, it makes it very hard to invest in the parts of the bill where they do make money as a utility. Now, merchant generators are solely dependent on the commodity costs that they get out of the electricity market. So supply-demand fundamentals mean a lot to them. These are the stock prices for 4 of the largest companies just over the last year. NRG up 99%, 100%. This was taken earlier this week. Vistra, another large company, up 245%. Constellation, which is probably the largest of them, up 87%. Talon up 252%. This has been probably the best sector in the market over the last years, merchant generation, IPPs. What are investors seeing? They're running the same models. They're looking at supply, they're looking at demand, and they expect prices to continue to rise in the market. One really kind of interesting note, I don't know if you can see it very well, but in the Constellation chart, right at the end, you see about a pretty good dip, like 10% they lost in about one day. That's related to the first story that I talked about, data centers. What caused that, just in the last week, on Friday, FERC, my old agency, released an order. There was a contested proceeding at FERC, and it had to do with a new data center. The data center was, and it was actually a Talon data center, but it had a big impact on Constellation because of their plan. So a new data center was planning to co-locate on site next to an existing nuclear unit, and the plan was to have the nuclear unit, and I can't remember how many megawatts it was, let's say 500 megawatts, that has traditionally just been injected onto the grid that everyone used. They were going to take that off the grid, directly connect to the data center behind the meter, and the data center would be served just by that nuclear unit. So that interconnection agreement was up for a vote at FERC. FERC rejected it because they were very concerned about what are the impacts of setting the precedent where hundreds of megawatts, thousands of megawatts potentially are coming off the grid just to serve one customer. And when that hit, Constellation, a big merchant generator with a lot of nuclear plants, their stock dropped 10%. And it was related to kind of what the expectation was for potential growth, again, driven by AI demand. So the path forward, and I'll open up for a few questions if folks have them. Number one, the current trajectory clearly is unsustainable. We can't continue this level of growth, that level of retirements, and not having a solution for how to figure that out. Something will have to give, whether it's demand will have to be kind of choked off because they just don't get access to the grid, or we'll have to have a bigger build in terms of available energy and delivery of energy. Number two, I already talked about this. The near term is relatively uncertain because we don't know how to bridge these next few years, but the longer term, the arc seems much more clear as new technologies come online, whether it's advanced reactors, whether it's small modular reactors, whether it's some hydrogen solution, whether it is some combination of battery and storage and generation closer to the load, carbon capture and sequestration like we're trying here in North Dakota. But that's a technology and an R&D question that is not something fixed in the next 5 years. Impacts, clearly, they're going to vary by region. We've talked about that. Pragmatic compromises, which I know in Washington, D.C., pragmatic compromise is tough to get to, but they're going to have to be made. There's no way we can meet that unsustainable trajectory without some sort of compromise on where we move forward. Regulations, things like permitting regulations, are going to have to be reformed. We can't take 15 years to build major infrastructure projects, whether it be pipelines, whether it be transmission lines, if they're going to be needed, whether it be generation, and meet the demand increase that we're seeing. And regulations and markets are going to have to adapt. The energy markets that we've developed for electricity today were built 25, 30 years ago when almost all generators had the same characteristics. They all had a fuel cost, they were almost all dispatchable, and building a system around that type of generator, when you have a system today which is much more intermittent, has lots of zero fuel cost resources on it, is a very different kind of market design. And then the last point here, which I'm obligated to say because I'm about to take over an association that represents state interests, states are going to play a vital role. The energy policy in the US is very, very state-centric. It is split between the federal government and state government. As I said, these impacts are going to vary by region, and states will play an absolutely key role. So that ends my prepared remarks. We can talk a little bit about where we may go after the election here if you want, but I do have a few questions that have come in. Okay, can you talk more about what fortifying the grid, oh, it just scrolled up. Can you talk about what fortifying the grid will look like to meet increased demand? Yeah, I mean, it's going to be sort of, I know all of the above is sort of overused, but it really is going to be an all of the above thing. It's going to take, like, I don't know how much transmission it's going to take, but it's going to take more. Is it going to take more pipelines? Yeah, it's going to take more gas pipelines. The story of the last few years, realistically, what companies have been investing in is a combination of renewables and gas. And the gas enables the renewables to do their job, because if it was just renewables, you wouldn't be able to run the system reliably. So gas will play probably a very important part of it. And then in addition, it's going to have to be constant R&D and development of these newer technologies, so that as we bridge the next decade, there's some sort of solution into the next decade, whatever that look like. So whether it's CCS or nuclear or whatever it might be. So I think that's probably the answer. Do you see a conflict or instead an uneasy alliance between data centers and electric utilities who wish to supply the data centers electricity? What policy changes might be needed to occur for behind-the-meter generation? So this is a great question. I think it's probably close to uneasy alliance, because there is an interest that both entities have. I mean, from a utility company's standpoint, it's a huge growth opportunity. And they're in the business of selling energy, so they have an interest in serving these customers. It's how they make money. It's what they do. They want to do it. From a data center standpoint and from a national security standpoint, we actually want the data centers developed here. Remember, you can develop them pretty much anywhere around the world. There's a national security reason you want AI being done in the US and not in China, right? So getting that answer right, I think there is everyone acknowledges there's an answer there. It maybe is a little bit of an uneasy alliance because it does have impact on other customers. You want to build it out in such a way that the growth doesn't negatively impact, or there aren't sort of inequitable cross subsidies where existing customers are subsidizing a new customer that's probably a lot wealthier than those other customers, right? So there'll be things to work out, but I think there actually is a solution to it. But again, it's a near-term, long-term kind of issue. The good thing for the US, if you want to look on the bright side, US is clearly the world leader in AI development. And clearly, I think, will continue to be so. And there is that general recognition that we want it here. China, for all sorts of reasons, clamps down on the ability of AI because they have a sort of closed society. So not eager to move to China. Europe probably has a worse energy position than we do in terms of availability, supply, and natural resources, and all of those kind of things. So really, the US is going to be, I think, the place to do AI and data center development, but it will be a challenge near term. We've got just like a minute left. Question about ERCOT. ERCOT, which is Texas, uses battery storage heavily for reliability characteristics of the grid. Why aren't we doing more of that in MISO and SPP? ERCOT has a very, very unique market design. It's sort of a one-off. And this is a lot longer question than 30 seconds, but I'll try to answer it quick. ERCOT Texas has a very unique market design and a very unique profile that they have down there in terms of the amount of natural gas they have in Texas, the amount of solar they have, and the amount of wind they have, all consolidated under one regulator, which is the state of Texas. Within ERCOT, they don't have to answer to FERC. It's an intrastate grid. So the retail regulator is the same as the wholesale regulator. They can move a lot faster on a lot of these things. And the way that they have designed their market, sometimes for better, sometimes probably for worse, does encourage a lot of battery storage given the profile of that grid. It's a lot tougher to do in a region like SPP or MISO, which is who runs the grid here in the Northern Great Plains. All right, with that, my time is up. I want to thank you for the invitation to be with you here today. Thank you so much, and I'll be around afterwards if anyone has questions.
All right, thank you, Tony, for sharing such valuable insights and for giving us such a powerful look into the future of utility regulation and energy policy. I think you can all see why we keep asking him to come back every year. It's been an incredible morning with each speaker adding depth to the conversation of the energy industry's most pressing challenges and opportunities. I hope you're all leaving today with new perspectives and ideas to explore in your work. Before we take off, I just want to again thank our sponsors, Xcel Energy and Cass County Electric, for your continued support, as well as all of our other sponsors, our members, and our partners. It's your support that allows us to have events like this, so thank you so much for your investment in our community and your commitment to your chamber. We're looking to continue the momentum behind the Midwest Summit Series, which leads me to announce our Economic Summit, which will take place on February 20th. This is going to be another key opportunity to engage on the issues impacting our region and beyond. We'll be gathering business leaders, policymakers, and experts across sectors to examine trends and explore the path forward for our communities and industries. That's all we have for you today. Thank you again. Safe travels and enjoy your day.